Well, it says that we're live anyway, so I guess we are. What's happening, Dustin? How you doing, man?
Doing good.
It is. It's definitely really cool that you accepted our invitation to join us at the Skeptic Tank. As I said to you, I like the kind of clarity of thought that you bring to the subjects that are passionate to you. You know, and one of those that I think primarily what we were talking about most often was woke culture, cancel culture, the epistemology of of wokeness, essentially, the critical race theory, critical feminist theory, these kinds of things, which frankly I don't know if they rise to actually the level of being theories. A theory actually has to be something that you can test and then falsify. So
Correct.
these
Of course,
the
if they did that, it would be called racist if we tested it.
if we actually tested it. No, it's true. These are self-fulfilling and self-supporting. They don't require. In fact, they reject the idea of any sort of challenge to their viability and to the kind of any sort of actually scientific method that is necessary to support any idea and call it a theory or a fact.
Correct. It's all subjective. It's all
That's
related
right.
to subjective rather than objective truth. It's going to be subjective.
Well, and any objective truth would then again be considered. I don't know if you read any of the. I read White Fragility, and I did based on the recommendation of one of the people who comes in to troll us often enough, David Peters, whom I need to be very clear. I have a great deal of respect for David. But I read it on his recommendation, and it's funny because it says, and I can't remember which page it's on. I saved it and sent it to my mother, who actually has a master's in psychology. She's an academic nut. I'm an academic nut. I come from a family of it. And so when I read it, I kept thinking, I couldn't write a paper like this and get it to pass muster. There's no way. Because, because first of all, the citations in it, and there were very few, it cited other people who simply said the same things. It didn't cite research. It was like, here's a citation from this person who said this too.
Mm-hmm.
That was shocking to me. And in a book this big, there were fewer than like 50, I think 50 or 60 citations. And there were some that did, to be completely fair, refer to solid research. Hey, Mike's here. Hey, Mike. But that solid research was mostly psychology and sociology. It wasn't actually specific to this critical theory idea, which is really, again, it's not a theory. It's barely a critical bad idea. you know. So,
When we look at like James Lindsay or Peter Boghossian and these guys who did all the hoax papers, and that was what really drew me into it because I was aware of it before, but the way they exploited it was
yeah.
what was fascinating because that's where you really kind of saw the bullshit. It's literally what it was.
Well, bring us up to speed. I'm aware of the hoax papers, which is some of the most brilliant. This is like trolling level beyond expert, man. This is like Jedi level trolling of the academic community. So go ahead and fill in that blank. Tell us what it's about.
So Peter Boghossian, James Lindsay, and Helen Pluckrose had short story of it is they had decided to infiltrate academia's own papers and show that basically on the sociology side or on the social science side that when it came to the humanities that you could pretty much get away with publishing whatever you want. And it could be taken as, oh, look, I published in a journal, so now I get my tenure and everything else, and I have some sort of status. So they went, and I think the two most famous ones that they're known for was dog humping in the park. So that was related to rape culture, and I think the summation of the end of it was that they would, if we just gave men shock collars and a few other things and trained them like dogs, then we could eliminate rape culture. And then the second one that was probably most fascinating one was that they took Mein Kampf from Hitler.
Hitler's book, Mein Kampf.
Remove the word Jew and put white male, and so that basically
and published this. It was published by academic journals, which then and for those of you who don't know, this is essentially like you said. This is how they get credentialed. When they publish, there's actually a saying in for professors and teachers: publish or perish, because otherwise you're kind of stuck with your teaching gig. But if you publish, then then it gives you some street cred in the academic world.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So essentially, these college professors, two of them are professors. I think Helen Pluckrose is still she's still just a mere master's degree, which is that's kind of low on the totem pole. Wow, I'm being completely sarcastic. But Boghossian is a professor of philosophy, if I'm not mistaken. And so is Lindsay's. Lindsay's a professor of philosophy too, right? They're both philosophers.
He's actually a doctorate in math. He's a math.
That's right. That's right. He's a mathematician. That's right. But he did his minor work in philosophy and history. So these are these brilliant, learned professors who they had noticed that this woke culture that was coming out of academia was from people who were essentially just kind of self-credentialing. They would write this junk, somebody'd publish it, and now all of a sudden that gives it some sort of validity. And so they created, I love the Mein Kampf one, they literally took Hitler's book and rewrote it from a feminist perspective, and it was published. And they got kudos from the publisher saying this is brilliant stuff. The other one was
exemplary work.
Right.
Exemplary work.
So, and the other one was the dog park where dogs would go and hump other dogs, which is absolutely freaking hilarious.
It is actually one of the you'll ever read. It's
it's freaking hilarious.
Yes.
It is.
Scarier. What's scarier is that if you go through, I can't remember. There's a Twitter site that links to other humanity papers.
Mm-hmm.
If you read those humanity papers, you can't tell between that and the dog humping in the park. And if you want to have a good time and have some fun, just read these things. It's literally madness. And when you see it from someone who looks at things objectively with logical and common sense, you look at it and you're like, this can't be.
I read enough of them to. I was mind blown. The dog humping in the park thing was about how dogs tend to want to go and hump other dogs while in the park, and it was using that example of rape culture for white men. Correct. And so and the conclusion of the paper was that if white men were trained the same way dogs are, using shock collars and treats and rough commands and such, then that would end rape culture. Seriously, they published this. Academics, and these are respected academic journals. I want to say they wrote on order of 20 and actually got 10 or 11 of them published. Is that correct? They wanted to write 20. They got 7 accepted, and I think 7 were accepted. 2 or 3 were published. Yeah.
And one of the 3, or 2 or 3, won an award.
That's right. I think it was the dog park thing, right? That's the one that won the award.
I believe it was the dog park.
Mind-boggling. And so this is the foundation for books like White Fragility, for example, which again, I did read it. I read it on a recommendation, and I'll tell you right now, the reason I read it was because there are a lot of people who find validity in it, and it's not up to me to decide whether or not it's valid for them. So it was recommended to me by my friend David Peters, who, if anybody comes and hangs out on Skeptic Tank's page long enough, you see David trolling us and seeing if he can catch anybody with the bait that he usually tosses out. And I want to say right now that I have a great deal of respect for David, and that might seem odd because of some of the things he said, but he gives as good as he can get, and he's a really smart guy. So the point being, I don't want to get too derailed with that, is that I read it because he recommended it. And I was thinking, okay, David is a black American. And if this is the way black Americans feel, why should I just summarily reject this idea? Shouldn't I want to say, okay, can I use information from this to try and bridge a communications gap? I don't understand what it's like to live that life. Seriously, I remember doing an interview for somebody who was a nursing student, and she had like a questionnaire that was pertinent to her studies to become a nurse. And one of the questions on it was, have you ever experienced a racial bias? And I said, no, I haven't. to those who have, I can't understand what that's. I can put it together in my head logically. It kind of, it's like, okay, this is shame. It can be embarrassing and difficult and etc. I'm sure, but I read the book on his recommendation. In fact, I read 2 or 3 on his recommendation because I felt that it was like, will this help us communicate better? We have problems to solve. For me to summarily reject this stuff because for whatever reason, would be, that's not going to help. So in any case, that's why I read it. But from the first page, there are so many problems with. If you look at it purely clinically, it's a disaster. You know what I mean? So does it have value to people that might help you communicate better? That was why I read it. But in terms of, I can criticize it as a disaster in terms of academically and clinically, it's a nightmare. It's complete junk. But in terms of if people are saying this really helped us communicate better, well, terrific. I want to know. So anyway, that's why I read it. But and so I recommend you do the same because again, you seem to. This is a passionate subject for you. If I'm not mistaken, this is, you take people to task for this a great deal, saying, if you're, and I kind of understand your position. I'll turn the mic back to you in a second, because when I seen the things that you post and the positions you argue on issues like wokeness and race, etc., you're saying, look, essentially, if you're going to want to affect everyone in this country or everyone in the world, you better have solid foundations and good reasons for doing so. So explain your foundations and reasons to me and change my mind. Am I getting this right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So
generally, when we're looking at the cultural matter of race, ethnicity, religion, sex, any of these other cultural identities, you have to be able to break it down to where you want to have a solution. That's viable, something that works. And usually when people present these intersectional ideas, so they come out of the critical theory area, it tends to look like a non-theistic religion to me. And by that meaning that you're more based on faith and, this is what it is, accept it. And when you go, well, where's the evidence to this?
Yeah.
Well, they get, just like if you were to approach someone who is very Pentecostal Christian, and you're asking, well, can you at least kind of show me how God exists or prove it to me? They tend to get a little agitated. Now, you might have some very smart people who can go on a theological discussion and kind of move around that pretty good. But for the most part, if you go up to anybody who's just blindly following a religious faith and you question it, they get very agitated. This is what happens when you look at the critical theory side or the intersectional side, is if you're like, well, racism is systemic and it even causes climate change, apparently. When you're like, well, how can you show me how this goes together? Because I'd like to know. I could probably side with you on it. Well, they can't, because it's nonsensical for the most part, but it's subjective.
Well, and to this point, David's actually in the chat now. Hey, David, how you doing, buddy? The other book that he shared with me was called The Color of Law, and it's really tough to get through because it's thick. I don't just mean in the number of pages, but in how wordy it is and how it's legalese.
That was written by a lawyer in the 90s. If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it was, and essentially his argument, and it's kind of a. It's history. It's legal history, essentially. And it does a really great job of illustrating how it is that the federal government was involved in segregation. Not just, we tend to get the story that segregation was, for example, white and black lunch counters were the choices of businesses. They weren't. That was actually the law. And it wasn't just the law in one Louisiana town. It was actually federal law. Another one of the illustrations that I think is relevant is redlining, for example.
Redlining is probably the most well-known one.
It is the most well-known, and the simple fact that I've looked at this a number of different ways, and I have to agree that David, I have to thank him again for providing me this information. It helps, it rounds us out a little bit better, but it also lets us know what our government has done in our name, which is why we have so many pissed off Americans. You know what I mean? If this is a government of the people, well, then the people screwed us. You know what I mean? So one of these one of the other examples was that culturally we're going to self-integrate. You know, we don't need government to force us to start talking to each other, you know, and starting to understand each other. But what government actually did, previous to World War II and then shortly thereafter, was began segregating us by essentially saying these two neighborhoods can't coexist this way.
Yes.
Actually, David is correcting us. Dr. Rothstein's not a lawyer; he is an economist. I think.
Oh.
It's been what, 2 years since you gave me the book, David. I think you might be right. In any case, these things were done by the top down, by the federal government, and the one thing that is an inescapable fact is that the disparity between wealth between white Americans and black Americans, most specifically, is because if they were redlined out of being able to own property, property has done nothing but, increase in value, especially since the 1940s and 50s. You know, I mean, and this is essentially what is passed on or sold for the proceeds to be given to the children, right? So essentially, this is where a huge chunk of this wealth gap comes from, and this is honestly one I've yet to hear a cogent argument in its entirety for something like reparations, but it's one of the best arguments that I've heard. You know, is that there were large groups of people that were specifically screwed out of owning property that would have given them a wealth advantage.
Correct.
You see what I'm saying? Now, again, I think it was about 6 or 8 months ago, David had shared with me an article. I believe it was a South Carolina town that was exploring reparations. And like anything, I read it. And I do not summarily reject anything just because I might disagree with the title or the premise of the idea. And when I read what their idea was, I went, that's not a bad idea. I can see that actually being not only viable, but working. And it shocked him. He was like, what?
Well, it's just like when you look at how, if we want to go back and look at history, like the Native Americans, the type of reparations we've had to take from them. Sometimes even me and my wife, for the most part, usually feel that they got the short end of the stick from the government. And when
yes,
redlining, for example, redlining basically was holding back a identity group from having that equal opportunity. And by doing so, that basically, as you said, created a wealth gap. It didn't only create a wealth gap, but also...
But it perpetuated it. It made it much worse.
It actually perpetuated a wealth gap, but also started kind of creating its own culture outside of anything else. So when you start getting different cultures within a subgroup, it becomes a little bit more challenging for integration. So if you go through 20, 30, 40 years of separation of cultural groups that are close together and then put them together, you tend to have some...
There's different, they speak different languages almost.
Correct.
You know, there are different, absolutely. And so you go and segregate groups of people and then expect them, here, we're going to put you all back together. Now get along.
Yeah. Hey, we screwed up. So here.
Yeah, we screwed it. Yeah. Oh, Eric Dryden's here too.
And all of a sudden we have all these issues of integration, and the integration can be, challenging, but sometimes it's considered, there's a racism issue. That's debatable, but it is possible depending on the culture that's being integrated in with, the American culture. And of course, it depends on location, county, city, everything else. But you will have an issue with integration. It's just like anything else. If you bring somebody in from a different culture and plant them into our culture, or vice versa, it does not matter. You are going to have a little bit of a growing pain trying to adjust for these things.
I wanted to bring up, this is something important too, and that Levittown, are you familiar with Levittown? I want to say that was, and again, I forgive me if I get some of the details wrong, but I believe it was New Jersey. Levittown was a development that was developed specifically to be white only post World War II. And he got, Levitt, the developer, got federal funds for this. So thankfully we don't tolerate this kind of shit anymore.
No.
But this is one of those things where, again, we also had some of the people who wanted to live there, some of our Black American brothers and sisters that wanted to live there, were World War II veterans. They went and fought for this country. That is not. I mean, there are reasons. Like I said, this is why when David provides me this stuff, I read it. Because I don't want to say, oh, this is all bullshit. It's not all bullshit. There's something to it. But we have to figure out how to talk to one another so that we can understand it.
I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Redlining, I was a little ambiguous to redline when I first heard about it. I was like, nah, no. And I did, just like you, someone provided me information. I found that it was something that was very real and something that did happen. It rocked me to the core. I was completely shocked, and
because it was done by our government, and we were raised to go. Our government is kind of the best in the world. We're the most honest, and it's not any less corrupt than any other one. Now it's funny because I know some of our more right wing friends are probably just going. You have to understand that arguments like this are nuanced. I can't say the right wing is the right way or the left wing is the way. I think anybody who knows me and who's chatted with me at all knows that I don't see it this way. That I'm more about good ideas and rejecting bad ones. And sometimes I think an idea that is good turns out not to be. And I'd much rather continue. It was Pennsylvania. Thank you, Troy. Troy has arrived. Hello, Troy. I wanted to say hello to Mike and John, and we've got a regular. Hey, David, I'm going to put this up because I really, again, I can't say it enough. We've had some great conversations in private that I think a lot of people aren't aware of because they've seen me and him argue back and forth over the last few years. And I've gotten private messages, and I know David knows this because I told him, why don't you get rid of that guy? He says, he calls you names and stuff. I'm like, why would I want? You guys tend to agree with me. He pushes back hard. I want to know why. It's more interesting to me to know how he sees stuff, in this kind of extreme disagreement. You know what I mean? Than it is to hear my own voice echoed back at me. So this is why I appreciate this kind of stuff. And this is what I'm saying is that I told David a few months back, and I'm sure you remember this, David. I sent him a private message saying, look, when COVID's over, I'm going to take you out, find the most obscenely, ridiculously expensive steak restaurant I could find, and I'm going to buy you dinner and talk to you as long as you will talk to me, because I think it'll be one of the most fascinating conversations I've ever had. And he was like, yeah, well, let's wait until, we don't run the risk of making one another sick, But I do appreciate you, bud. Hey, Will Custer is here. Will's a local businessman, and I do business with him. He's an interesting character, that guy, one of the hardest working people I think I've ever met. So, Ruth Chris, I think is a great place, John, but I was thinking, David's more of a, let's take him to, what's the place in San Francisco? Something a little bit more specialized, but something along those lines.
Something in the Bay Area.
Yeah. I know you like steak, David. I don't smoke cigars, but so I'm gonna have to skip that because I'd probably buy you some crap if I was gonna buy you a cigar. In any case, let's move on. We got a bunch of other things to talk about, and thanks for your participation, David. John, let's see. I want to see what John had to say here real quick. If government is responsible for so many poor decisions and evil deeds in the past, why is it that so many people want to continue to give them more centralized power? Government corruption continues to grow as the government gains more power. This is the thing that kills me about the divide between the left and the right, between Republicans and Democrats, between liberals and conservatives, is that depending on who's in power, it's like, yeah, give them, if I agree with who's in power, if I'm on that team, if I'm cheering for that group, if I'm on that squad, then what, let's give them that power. Let's let them do what they're doing and not criticize it. If it's flipped, then I'm actually criticizing it. I'm against it. And this actually, I think, is a pretty good segue into one of the things I wanted to bring up tonight. And that is that, and I really wish I had the page and I lost it. But the exit polls from this past election, the presidential election, showed that a whopping 62% of voters did not vote for Trump. I mean, vote for Biden. They voted against Trump. So 62%. This is unbelievable. What this is suggestive. Alexander Stakehouse. Okay, cool. What this suggests is that, as it is, the majority of the electorate doesn't understand the issues or even care much about them. The science is in on this. People vote for somebody based on how they make them feel, not necessarily about policy or their history. So that being said, what this election was about is this guy is offensive to me. You know, he's brash, he's rude, he's an asshole. And I'm sorry, man, Trump's an asshole. I really find him to be quite embarrassing myself. I have made no secret of this. So we need to get rid of him. And I've heard this directly from a few people. I don't like using anecdotal evidence, but from a few people that I've spoken to, they don't have any idea what Biden's doing and don't care. I was actually straight up told by my dad yesterday, I don't give a shit. I wanted to get rid of the orange guy. And I say, well, do you know what this dude's doing? You know, do you know who's on his transition team and what they stand for? Do you know what kind of corporations are now involved in the cabinet? So I think it's fairly unprecedented. Obama had a very corporate powerhouse, of a cabinet. I think Biden's takes it a step further. So I wanted to kind of go over that real quick. So let's look at this. Biden's cabinet should be wearing the logos of all of the corporate power that they represent, like race car drivers do on their uniform, right? One of the most incredible appointments is the woman that worked as Obama's immigration chief that defended separating children from their parents at the border.
Yes.
It's like this was one of the biggest, I think it was first year, it was 2016 into 2017. This was the biggest issue. Was look what he's doing. He's separating children from their parents. And honestly, by executive order, that's what he was doing. He figured, man, this blew up in his face and it was a really dumb idea. But enforcing that rule was going to prevent people from from coming here with their kids. So then he chose Flournoy for defense secretary. She supported the war in Iraq and the one in Libya, criticized Obama when he didn't want to get involved in Syria, crafted the surge in Afghanistan, and refuses to commit to banning arms sales to the Saudis or end our involvement in the war in Yemen. Yeesh. Then, on top of it, we have Blinken. I supported the war in Libya. And I've spoken to some, I do have, I've toured all over the world. I've been all over the planet. And I've made a lot of friends in the Middle East. I played in Dubai. And Dubai is a very interesting place because no one is from Dubai. Like, no one. They are usually expatriated from Libya, Egypt, Afghanistan, Iraq. And it was, I got to tell you, one of the most sobering experiences I've ever had was coming into Dubai to play music with Circle to Circle and being treated as if I was important, and then I start speaking to these people who tell me stories about how they watched their families' lands be burned by ISIS, by having, the government come in and wipe out their families, kill their livestock, take their food, wipe out their bank accounts. And so their options were to basically flee, and they ended up in Dubai. And that was, it was so humbling that I don't know that I would ever feel important again. You know what I mean? What they dealt with was real. I'm over there as a spoiled California kid that gets to play his guitar and get paid for it. That's so in any case, Blinken started the war in Libya that created the massive slave markets. So this was something that was done under the Obama administration with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State during the Arab Spring. We took out Gaddafi, who was basically, he'd become our lapdog. He was being a good boy, but we go over there, take him out, completely destabilize the region, and now Libya is a disaster. And the slave trade there is huge as a result of Blinken's policies as an advisor to Mrs. Clinton. He also defended Israel's massacres of Palestinians in Gaza. He started the war in Yemen and is the head of a private equity firm that provides money and support to companies like Raytheon and Blackwater and has funded arms sales to the Saudis. So Biden is staffed up with corporate power from anti-labor organizations, Uber and Lyft. right? Now, I don't know if I agree with that characterization of those companies, but from, if I was like a progressive, that's how I'd see it. Let's see. The woman who's known for defending child separations. Oh, and then you remember the big deal about Trump's children working for him. This is terrible. This is awful. Kamala Harris's husband now has a cabinet post. Biden's brother was hired as a contractor to build houses in Afghanistan. He made millions of dollars building houses in Afghanistan during the Obama administration. Or Iraq, sorry. Let's see. Ron Klain, who will be the chief of staff, was a lobbyist for a major law firm. Apparently, he represented big tech companies and big pharmaceutical companies, along with Fannie Mae and drug manufacturer Inclone, who was being investigated by Congress. And his transition advisors, you're going to love this. This is Biden's transition advisors include executives from Uber, Visa, Capital One, Airbnb, Amazon, the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, and the nonprofit run by Google CEO Eric Schmidt, and Steve Ricchetti, who will be the counselor to the new president, who co-owned a lobbying firm that worked for Eli Lilly, Novartis, and Pfizer.
So these are all neoliberals, basically.
Oh, this is like they define neoliberalism. This is the definition of it.
Shocked.
Oh yes, I'm absolutely, and I was too. I'm looking at this going, this is kind of what I figured we were going to see.
Oh yeah, no, this
is not a huge surprise. This is, it's like, okay, this is how we used to do stuff, and they wanted to go back to normal. Well, here it is.
You got your normal people. There you go.
So, John, actually, here I'm going to post. I love that I can do this. This is really cool, where I can put up your comments. Oops. Are you surprised that Biden is picking corporate lackeys, the Democrats of the party of Wall Street and the coastal elites? I do believe, I will tell you right now, I do believe there has been a paradigm shift that does happen. The parties have kind of flopped. The Democrats were absolutely, genuinely, as I was growing up, the party of the working class. There's no doubt. And the Republicans were the party of big corporate power. And I've said this before on this show. I said it in some videos that I made. We really have to have both. Corporations do have the right to exist, and they are also very useful to all of us if they do. At the same time, they need to be kept in check. So also we need...
Basically.
Pardon me? I'm sorry?
Mixed economy, basically. A mixed economy.
Well,
we have a mixed...
Well, a balanced approach to the economy, a balanced approach to social issues as well. It's funny because actually my wife is asking if you can turn up your mic.
Oh, really?
Can you guys hear Dustin okay?
How about this? Were you getting a little louder?
Yeah, I can.
I had a puberty squeak right there.
He says with a chin covered in gray hair.
Yeah, it's the only place I can grow hair. There, my nose, my ear, and my ass. That's it. Not on my head.
That was a little bit more than I needed to know. We probably could have gleaned that, just based on an experience. Actually, we're getting a question here. Hello, Tarek. We're being asked what... I'll be honest with you. I don't like making comments on stuff I haven't deeply researched. And frankly, I don't know enough about NAFTA. I understand... I don't like forming my opinions based on what I've heard. I've heard that it was terrible for the American worker. I've heard, that it was great for big corporations. I don't know that for sure. Do you know enough about it to comment, Dustin?
All I know is that it was some sort of agreement between Canada and Mexico that was done, I think it was 1993, 94, something like that. And it was basically just trying to make it to where we would have a better trade deal or some sort of equalization between Canada and Mexico. But of course, this is where it gets interesting from what I understand of it. It's been a long time since I've even looked at this. Is that the reason why the Trump administration was so against it is that the agreement basically created a more of a quality of outcome for Canada and Mexico versus the United States. So it kind of benefited them more than us.
That's my understanding of it as well. And again, I'm sorry I don't know enough about it. In fact, I'm going to make a note to research NAFTA more. I mean, it's just not something that, I spend a lot of time reading all kinds of stuff. And that's something that I did write it down. I will dig a little deeper into this. So thanks for the question. David's saying, why are you surprised that Biden is picking corporate lackeys? Trump picked them too. All administrations do. Yes, I know. That wasn't my point. It wasn't to say that he's doing something different. It's to say that, see, David's got a position on this. We really should get David in here. He knows a lot about this kind of stuff, actually. My point wasn't that Biden is doing something so different, David. It was really that every single little appointment, every little thing that Trump did was put under a microscope, and it was given so much more volume as to paint it out as if he was doing something more evil or more nefarious than anybody else ever did. And so this is why people needed to get rid of him, because he is the ultimate representation of whatever is horrible about our government and evil and blah, blah, blah. And the fact is that now we've got this guy coming in that 63% of the people that voted for him don't have any idea what he stands for.
Yeah.
And this is actually what you and I were talking about in the thread earlier today, David, when I said that there was a poll saying that, these people would have voted for Trump had they known what he did and how the media had downplayed the good things that Trump did. We'll get to that. But the point being is that I'm saying objectivity is necessary. The founding fathers of this country were brilliant and flawed, just like anybody. You know what I mean? They had there's some great points about what they did, and there was some flaws in their ideas. We can accept that. It's, to hold them up as absolute perfection is something I never understood. But yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't get it. Like lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court. Talk about a bad idea. You know what I mean? But I also understand the arguments behind that and why that was it was a compromise. Anyway, so the foundational structure of the country allows for the stuff that we're pushing back against, and then we just kind of get lazy with it. We can actually create the change that we're talking about here. We can actually have an equal application of principle to where the politicians, rather than driving us, start listening to us. And the way we do that is we stop factioning into two different religious groups that say this guy's good and this guy's bad, and I voted for this guy, now I can go back to doing what I was doing. The founding fathers, that was my original point, believed that, first of all, have you noted that the electoral college system is only applicable to the president? We don't use it to vote for senators, congressmen. We don't use it to vote for anything else. That is by design. There is a point. First of all, this is the guy with his finger on the button. He's in control of the military. That was the primary reason, because founding fathers wanted an educated electorate. They figured that that we really needed people to represent the voters in the electors, because the voters needed to really understand who it is they were providing power to. And we don't. And that is, again, it's evidenced by a 62% exit poll that says people just got rid of one guy and voted for the other and don't really have any idea, potentially, what it is that he stands for, or whether or not they would actually support it. Essentially, the last guy was pissing me off and he was loud and he was a narcissist. So let's get rid of him. Well, why don't we actually look at it and go, you know what, let's get rid of him and replace him with somebody who is better, when we're replacing him with somebody who simply doesn't offend us. He's doing the same stuff to some degree. Trump really did want to bring I think the way Trump looked at issues like wars in the Middle East, endless wars, it's not effective. It isn't efficient. Why are we wasting so much money here? I'm pretty sure that that's the way he looked at it.
Didn't he remove 5 people from the Pentagon because of that?
Yes.
So they basically found out that he'd been lied to by the top people in the Pentagon over trying to keep things going over there. And he's like, well, that's ridiculous. And he pretty much asked him. Of course, if you read the media, the way they reported it, their narrative on it was extreme panic. And
right.
Personally,
and this is the way
is very poor. I thought he did a good job there. Yeah, if they're gonna just sit there and spend our tax dollars just for the fact that they have to try and justify their existence, get rid of them. I don't care.
Well, and this is to that point. during the entire administration, we had, uh-oh, Trump fired this person. That means he's an incompetent boob. It's like, well, that's one potential reason. I will agree that it's very possible that Trump fired certain people who are, quote, experts because he's an idiot. Okay, that's entirely possible. Is it also not arguably possible that he went, you and I aren't seeing this the same way? I understand that you're an expert. I appreciate your expertise. I have an idea that I don't want to do the same thing. We've been looking at the same thing now for 30 years. Let's change that. I need fresh meat in here. So he gets rid of somebody like a Max Boot or John Bolton. Yeah. Bolton is a well-known war hawk. This is a guy who wrote in his book, we need to invade the Middle East and wipe out Iran and put our garrisons there. But Trump was criticized for firing a prick like that. You see what I'm saying?
Get rid of Bolton. Right. When they got pulled Bolton in, I was actually like, what are you doing? Bolton's going to just, his idea is whatever happens in the Middle East, if somebody just happens to light a cigarette and he gets the flag on fire, he wants to shoot a bomb. It's like, oh. But
yeah, that's Bolton.
That's Bolton. But for the most part, that's because, I haven't read Bolton's book, and I don't know Bolton, but I would say he's a war hawk in the effect of is that I think he has fears of how things happen in the Middle East, and he would just rather look at it in a conquering fashion. If we just go in there and westernize it and make it possible to have your oil, then we're good, because we'd have our what do you call it, changing of the guard with America's military going in there and supplementing everything. Jimmy Dore talks about this quite a bit.
I was just about to say Jimmy Dore talks about it a lot. I love Jimmy, man. We are at opposite sides of the political spectrum. Yep. I will, even admit my position in the political spectrum is related to Jimmy Dore, but he's a critical thinker. Yes. I might not agree with his policy ideas, but I certainly appreciate how well he takes these arguments apart.
I definitely disagree with him on quite a few things, but the fact that he's able to present it in a critical, it doesn't matter if it's Republican, Democrat, he's going to just throw it at you and say, this is who did what and why, and this is why I hate it. And you can go, okay, fair enough.
That's what he's doing too. I mean, I do understand his positions on universal health care and the way he wants government to spend money, et cetera, that I would take, but it's funny because here's like Mike, for example. Mike is a Skeptic Tank member, and he is a self-admitted conservative, and he's saying Jimmy Dore is great. This is, again, what I tend to find is that when we start actually communicating with one another, rather than wanting to fight one another, we can say things like, I really love this guy. This dude on the left is really smart. Rather than, oh God, that leftist is a piece of shit. That's not helping. So I want to go back up a little bit here we got Dan McCann, and I'm going to say, Dan, this is what I'm talking about. We're doomed until the three branches of government follow the intent of the Founding Fathers and drop their ideological activism. I have a problem with that, Dan, simply because politicians have become a product. And they are for sale to us. And so they do what they do because we essentially buy them. They put together their expensive $1 billion campaign. Wasn't it just, I think it was the re-election campaign of Lindsey Graham. They spent $1 billion for Lindsey Graham. $1 billion? That's what they spend on presidential elections. But for Lindsey Graham, evidently this is how much they're getting into the hundreds of millions for Mitch McConnell too. So these people will not stop doing what they're doing ideologically until we as consumers go, we're not buying that anymore.
Exactly. If we look, now that's interesting, Christian, because you actually bring up a very good point concerning voting. If we as voters, as the people, looked at our politicians as a product, I know this sounds crazy. If we looked at it as a product and the product wasn't good, you don't go.
We wouldn't buy it. We don't buy it. People go. We tend to, as consumers, get ripped off once and go, "Fuck this! I'm not buying this again." I'm not going to buy a Ford again or a Chevy or whatever. When you've had a bad experience with a product, you don't do it twice. This is the only product that we tend to buy over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So and to move down to what to connect what Dan said to this to what John Tibbs is saying is you can't have an educated electorate with a corrupt and biased press. We have censorship in the press and in social media, and it's all designed to elect the left. I don't know. See, yeah, it probably is in some way or another, but again, this is the product that they're selling, and obviously it's working for them because this is what they sell the most. You know what I mean? They're selling to the left, it seems, the most. So is that because that's what they want? Or is it because this is what people are buying? I think there's an argument for both. But I have said in the past, and I know, John, you and I actually talked about this. And Dustin, I don't know if you've heard me say it or not, but very often I'll hear that the press is just is the propaganda arm for the DNC.
Democrat Party?
I disagree completely. The press is far more powerful than the DNC. Far more powerful. The DNC is capable of. Here's an example. CNN can absolutely destroy Chuck Schumer. Could Chuck Schumer destroy CNN? No. No.
Not at all.
So the press is actually they're more powerful by far than our government and our politicians. They're far more powerful.
I would take it a step further because I think you're correct there. I think the press. The reason why we have. Well, of course, I'm going to kind of sidestep that. A fair amount of the division in the country comes from the press because they have that power to push the narrative very well for people who are subjective to it. And by you saying that they have more power than even our current politicians, I'd have to agree. The media, the mainstream media, from where to speak, would probably definitely have a lot more. They have the money, they have the presence, they have the what do you call it? They're in your face, and people for some reason. I mean, me and you talked about this. I did some AP journalism. I kind of know the whole rules and laws and kind of go with journalism. And me and you discussed it that when you watch mainstream media, you're not watching.
No. We're watching a sideshow.
Yeah,
it's a sideshow to what journalism. Journalism is supposed to be the main event, and it's not anymore. The sideshow is taken over.
Right? It's kind of wrestling. So if
you know who used to say that? You know who used to say that was
like high school wrestling is wrestling, but if you look at WWE, everyone's like, no, that's wrestling. You're like, no, CNN or MSNBC or Fox, they're basically WWE. But if you look at like some of these independent journalists, that's like the high school wrestling where you grapple or you're doing some stuff like the actual wrestling, the real stuff, not stuff that's getting people to look at it.
And again, this is actually a really good. This is a good. Segue into this other stuff that I wanted to talk about because I before we went live, when we were talking about some of the comments in the Skeptic Tank with my friend Kyle and that Trump is a lying piece of shit. I can't stand him. He lies. It's all about the lies, right? And so it occurred to me when I was reading his comment on that, which again I want to make sure everybody understands. I have a great deal of respect for Kyle as well. I don't. We might disagree on this point, but he's a good friend, and I think he's really bright. The issue is this: if I was trying to create a divisive narrative, and I found, hey, this guy right here, his biggest weakness is that he sounds like a used car salesman. He's constantly bullshitting. So how exactly would I use that to drive a wedge between him and even his supporters? Well, I would actually lie about what Trump's lying about. So as you see what I mean? So journalists, the sideshow, I love it, man. They're a sideshow. This is cool.
Clown show.
The clown show, man. This is the media circus. These are
anytime the media does their little thing, I hear the yakety sax.
Oh, absolutely. I when you said that, I thought it was brilliant. That is a good soundtrack for some of this stuff. Actually, I'm going to step again right into the chat here. We got Robert Fox. It says, if you want to fix the product, You have to add more options to the product list. If we want a true fix, we need to step away from the blue-red and vote for another party and make political power remember they're supposed to work for us. This is something that Donnie Howell just above him said something very similar. And again, I agree. I think, the founding fathers hated the idea of parties. They didn't want, if you simply Google Thomas Jefferson on political parties, you'll find he really said some really very, really horrible stuff about political parties. It wasn't in it.
Federalist Papers?
No, actually, he wasn't involved. That was
No.
Alexander Hamilton, and I want to say it wasn't John Jay. Madison. Who was the third? There were supposed to be three, and Hamilton ended up writing almost all of them. There was 53 of them, and he wrote 36, I want to say. I could be wrong. In any case, so what I'm talking about here is the way that the press is almost like an advertising agency in this case. But what I discovered is that, yes, for the most part, the press seems to have their own agenda, and they've found the party to drive it for them. It isn't the other way around.
Yeah.
That would be, because again, they have the money and the power. They can drive pretty much anything they want. So they found the workhorse that they want, and at present, that workhorse is doing the work that they want. So part of that is what's very interesting to me is now I'm going to bring up, for those of you who haven't hung out with us too much before or are new here, I do not summarily reject a source because of the source. I want to see what the source has to say, and then from there I can make up my mind objectively about whether or not what the source is saying is credible. So that being said, I'm going to lead into what I wanted to discuss about Project Veritas. A lot of people have, this guy makes stuff up and blah, 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 and maybe he does. I don't know. On the few things that I have decided I was going to pay attention to, the Project Veritas had done. Wow, look at this. Shout out from the Philippines. Look at this. Well, welcome to the show. Boy, that's quite a ways away, Tricia. Welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Yes.
That Project Veritas has done some stuff that, I think that it's funny. David pointed out yesterday. Thank you. It was John Jay then. It was Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. That Kimmy, my better 2/3, as I say, has because I'm only a third of a man without her. It was Madison and Jay. Federalist Papers were written by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. That Project Veritas they are self-serving like any other for-profit company. They have to be. At the same time, if they are selling a BS product, people are going to see through it, and they're not going to, they'll end up shrinking the base of their clientele, their customers, to a point where it's just the usual conspiracy theorists rather than being able to grow it. So what I would like to point out is that this was really interesting, and I don't know how he got it. Have you seen this? Where evidently the CEO at Project Veritas had access to the live 9 a.m. phone calls that the CNN editorial staff and their CEO have every morning, where they discuss how they're going to present issues to the country. So I started listening to some of the calls. He began publishing them on, I want to say, Monday night. I can't say that I'm surprised at... right on, Robert. Thanks for popping in, man. I cannot say that I'm surprised, but most of the discussions I've heard, and I'm not going to play them here because I don't want to use them as some sort of here. These guys are going to make my point for me by you listening to what they have to say. Thank you, Mike. James O'Keefe is the CEO's name. Go to Project Veritas's website and watch and listen to the videos yourself. What I took away from them, again, I wasn't terribly surprised. Most people confuse my attacks of the press as a defense of Trump. It's not. It is an attack on the press and the way they framed Trump. I make it very clear. I didn't vote for him either time. I wasn't motivated to vote for him. My principles aren't for sale. And secondly, he doesn't need my defense, and he wouldn't care if I defended him anyway. I'm not a party guy. That's not how this works for me. So, but when I look at, and I did this during the 2015, during the debates and during the presidential race, I found myself in the uncomfortable position of defending Hillary Clinton from the press too, because not just from the press, but from social media. These people are corrupt enough, they lie enough, they are full of shit enough to where we don't need to make up stuff to go after them for. They do plenty that we can be critical of them for. We don't need the press embellishing it. We don't need lies being circulated on social media. So my overall point, as always, is let's think carefully about what we're being told rather than going, yeah, it aligns with what I think and how I feel, so I'm going to bob my head along with it. That is what the Skeptic Tank is about, ladies and gentlemen, at least for me. So these discussions that we have, this is all really great. By the way, I wanted to thank David again. He's continuing to the discussion on NAFTA. But what I'd probably like to do, David, if you're up for it, is have you in here one of these nights and have you go over it. I was also asked just a couple, who was it that just asked about foreign policy, a trade deficit with China? I don't know enough about foreign policy to have an intelligent conversation about it, frankly. You know, I can tell you what I think I know, but I'd rather actually know it. So what I did actually, I hope I'm saying it right. Tariq Belushi, Tariq. I hope I'm saying it right. I wrote down that I need to research that, and I need to research NAFTA because I don't want to make comments if I don't have enough information. That's just something I don't like doing. So, in any case, let's move on to let's see. So I get a call from my dad. Cracks me up. He is dyed in the wool lefty. So is his wife. To the point where I think I told you this last night when we were chatting, Dustin, is that I've literally seen my stepmother hugging a tree. And I asked her, because we have some camp property up in the mountains and we go up there, you know, as a family for the last 30 or 40 years or whatever. And my stepmom's hugging this tree and I'm going, what are you doing? She says, I'm listening for its heartbeat. That's what I'm talking about here. But very often my dad will send me an article because he knows that I'll read it and then I'll analyze it, I'll fact check it, and then I'll find arguments and counter arguments. This is what I do. I mean, I am studying for an advanced degree in history. And I got to tell you, I'll tell you, Dustin, very often I consider switching that major to philosophy because I love it so much. But in any case, oh, I love philosophy because I personally think history and philosophy, they reflect one another. Philosophy creates policy. It creates governments. And then if you want to see how that philosophy worked out, you look back in history and say, what was the philosophy of the people who built this government? Anyway, so my dad will send, so yesterday he sends me this, I'm going to share the screen with you so you can see what I'm looking at. Stop sharing the screen. I'm going to we're going to do the Brady Bunch framing here so that I can share the screen.
Do that. Hold on one sec.
Yeah, no problem.
Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Let me know when you come back. I'm going to take you off the screen. So this is what my dad sends me. Big companies urge Biden and Congress to address climate change. So I said, okay, I'm going to check this out. Let's see what it has to say. A broad cross-section of the big U.S. corporations, including Amazon.com, Citigroup, and Ford Motor Company, are calling on Congress to work closely with President-elect Joe Biden to address the threat of climate change. In a letter sent to the Congress, the Biden transition team on Wednesday, more than 40 companies say they support the U.S. rejoining the Paris Climate Accord and urge President-elect Biden and the new Congress to work together, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't detail a specific action plan. Actually, I am, wow, it's telling me that I have to subscribe. I am subscribed. I'm using the wrong browser. Right here, General Motors Company said last week that it will no longer back the Trump administration's legal battle to strip California's authority to set its own fuel efficiency regulations. That stuck out to me because, not because of what it says, but because what it doesn't say. There isn't any explanation there. And when you click on the link to find out what that meant, you know, because this was actually updated last month, but this is something that's been going on for a couple of years. I wanted to see what that meant. Okay, why would Trump want to strip California of its right to dictate its own emissions policy?
Okay, I'm back.
So I went and started doing some digging. What was the idea behind this? Is this strictly because Trump is a gross polluter and he doesn't care about the environment? That's the way that his policy has been framed, and I wanted to know if that's why. Is it possible? Is this true? So I went and checked it out, and no, that's not what it was about. What it was about was that if California sets emission standards, commits to them, and cannot reach them, it gets federal government subsidies in order to continue working on it. And those subsidies you cannot audit them. So in other words, California could say this year we're going to hit 55 miles to the gallon. We didn't hit it. Oh man, we're still actually polluting by this many. Cubic tons of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. Federal government, we didn't hit it. We need some more help. Federal government gives us a check for a couple, and I'm summarizing here, couple of $1 billion, and then California can do whatever they want with that couple of billion. They don't have to. There's no federal audit for that that holds them to research or whatever. So now I looked at the arguments against. Why would we not want to do that? And it's simple, and that's because if the federal government sets these regulations, then some states will set them really low, and some said, rather than it being uniform. So I understand that argument as well. So then I started thinking, okay, well then what the hell does GM get out of this? Can you guess, Dustin, what GM would get out of not backing something like that?
Well, I can tell you what they would lose with subsidies.
Subsidies, ladies and gentlemen. Why would GM and Amazon and all these other companies, Toyota? Because the goal in California especially, but the goal of the federal government is to have us all reach a certain number of electric cars by a certain day and at a certain time, and these electric cars will be backed. This whole idea, this whole scheme essentially will be paid for by taxpayer money, which is that not the definition of corporate welfare? It is my understanding that corporate welfare is bad. Right. Or is it only bad when you agree with the reason or would disagree with the reason? Otherwise it's good. So I called my dad and I was like, well, this is what I found. So he was like, well, it's come from the Wall Street Journal. I figured you being, conservative. I'm like, Dad, I'm not conservative. I've never been conservative. Why do you keep saying I'm conservative, man? Here, I'm going to show you all right now how conservative I am. I'm for safe and legal abortion. I believe that the states have individual rights to implement their own gun control laws. Boy, there's some right-wing stuff, huh? Corporations need to be regulated. Boy, I'm a right-winger, all right.
So what happens is, it's funny you go into that little thing, because I know I've had conversations with people who lean left. And sometimes, okay, let me preface this. You know what's worse than a non-smoker?
Is an ex-smoker.
Yeah. So when somebody on the left starts kind of throwing me into the right category, I'm like, I don't think you understand where I came from. I've been on this side before, pretty far, by the way. And when that trajectory keeps pointing over into the right, like, hey, you didn't check all the boxes. I'm like, correct. I don't check all the boxes on the right.
Nope.
But I also don't check all the boxes on the left either. It comes to that, we talked about this. It comes down to that principle, of making sure that you're looking at things through objectivity, common sense, logic, everything else.
And that's what it's about, ideas. It's about ideas. This is why it's funny. David Peters is saying right now. David's saying you play a conservative on Facebook. No, I don't. I have been very consistent in saying
don't do that. I would have spit all over my computer screen. I'm Christian. I'm a liberal, but I play a conservative. I
play a conservative on TV. Hey, you know what? That was Stephen Colbert's whole shtick. When he first, started his show, he was like pretending to be a conservative and being a boob. That was his whole thing. So Donnie Howell actually brings up again, this is me in my crusade against a media that makes billions of dollars on dividing us, and it has more power than our own government does. The average American will read the headline and maybe a paragraph. Media top loads and then slightly changes the narrative later. In the article where most people don't go. I actually spoke to Donnie today on the phone, and we were discussing this. And I said that that's not by accident either. It is by design, but it's also by specific design. They pay research companies to tell them exactly how many words that we read before we move on. And they know. They know exactly where to place information based on spending a lot of money to be told exactly where they should be placing it. They know exactly. Yeah.
I can tell you that's true. As a marketing guy, it's true.
Did a bunch of research actually for Donnie's company. Donnie is a local businessman, and a year or so ago, I did some research. He and one of the people in his organization asked me about it was like website layout or design, if I remember right, and which is something I don't do. I'm a network security specialist, but I figured, okay, let me see if I can point you in the right direction. And one of the paths that my research led me down was a company called MailChimp, MAIL, not MALE. MailChimp.
I'm very familiar with MailChimp.
Right. And they used to be, this is kind of like before there was LinkedIn, before there was Salesforce, there was MailChimp. MailChimp was like the very first do-it-yourself marketing software from MailChimp that automated your emailing of your flyers and stuff, right? Back in the 90s.
I still use it.
Do you actually use MailChimp? Oh, that's funny. Now they've become a big time market research company. Huge. So I started reading, I actually paid for some of their information so I could see, how this stuff is approached. MailChimp said that on average, a person reads no more or no less than 28 words of a news article. 28. They had it right down to the number of words based on, that was the median. Not the mean, but the median.
Based on the data,
and they can tell how much is collected by scraping metadata off the internet. This is how we are provided with our thoughts. I've said this before. If you are not critically thinking, if you are not critically assessing information you're being presented with, your ideas are being installed. They are not yours. They are being provided to you.
Yes.
So that being said, this is to Donnie's point. This is. Also, they know this, and this is also how we end up with something like this. And this is something that David was actually kind of teasing me about it earlier today. So I'm going to see if I can find it. It was a media research center put together I honestly, to be perfectly honest, I haven't read the methodology behind this yet. Where is it? I'm sorry? Well, it was essentially, it's actually on our own page. It is.
It's for the Skeptic team.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's on our own page. Let me see if I can find it here. It was a survey that basically said that a certain number of people that were polled said that if they were aware of the Hunter Biden issue, if they were aware of some of the things that Trump had accomplished, they wouldn't have voted for Biden. Here, I found it. I'm actually going to share it.
Turn out.
Like I said, I haven't read the methodology. Personally, I don't like stuff like this in general because I think it's really kind of easy to push these numbers around. You went to school. Do you take it's an online opt-in survey, so there's really no method to it. That's something that I'm going to have to agree with you on, David. There's really nothing to it. But let's check this out anyway, because again, it still illustrates my point. It still illustrates my point that this was created in order to make us think something that may or may not actually even be rooted in something solid. So I'm going to share the screen again with you all here. And we're going to do the little Brady Bunch window thing. And this essentially says that if... The idea here is a GovTrack analysis found that blah, 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 blah. Where is it? The Media Research Center basically said, based on polling survey of 1,750 actual Biden voters in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, that the percent of people who were unaware that But the Biden sexual assault allegations, 34% were not aware. So 8.9% of them said that they would shift away from Biden. 8.9% in a presidential election is enough to change the entire election. That's big. That's a really big gap in a presidential election. The Hunter Biden scandal, 45.1% were not aware. That's, and 9.4% said that would shift their vote away from Biden. And then the things that I'm just going to skip down here because, again, I don't want to give this too much relevance. 33.1% economic growth. Nearly 50% people said they weren't aware of this, and that 5.6% of them would shift their vote. Created 11.1 million jobs, Middle East peace deals. All of these people claimed, at least if let's say that, okay, these people told the truth and we're actually being, this is being represented properly. Let's say we're just simply going to accept these numbers. We still can't know how many of them really would have changed their vote for one thing. I hate speculative crap like this for that reason. But again, it still illustrates the overall point that we're talking about here and what media does to our minds, what it is they're trying to feed us. I remain skeptical. I'm glad you pointed out the methodology, David. I always do read the methodology. In this one, I have to admit I did not. So,
by the way, yes. It's not just what the media feeds us. It's what they don't feed us as well.
Well, and that actually is that's the point. Let's actually drive this the way we want it to go, which is to circle back around to where we started with Project Veritas, where I was talking about how I recommend that take it for what it's worth, but go listen to these phone calls between the CNN editorial staff and the CEO of CNN, where they're saying, look, we can't, and I'm going to paraphrase, we can't give Trump a voice on this. We can't let people know that he did these things. We have to frame it this way. We can't give him that edge. This is the kind of conversation that they were having. So my dad, when I brought it up to him, got angry and said, well, you don't think I know that? And I'm like, no, Dad, I don't think that you do, because it isn't important enough to you. What was important was the way Trump made you feel, not what he did. You don't even know what he did. What was important about, do you know what Biden's doing? No, you don't. So this is what I was talking about earlier. We get, and I've said this so many times, we get the government we deserve when you're not paying attention. Now, a lot of the people here in our chat, David and John, Troy, Donnie, Mike, I'm being asked great questions from some people I haven't seen here before. You're all welcome. I'm glad you're here. This is the kind of thing that I think more Americans would be involved in if they understood how much they're being duped and manipulated. Mm-hmm. There are always going to be the religious factions that will always defend their lying, corrupt team while attacking the other lying, corrupt team and figure that they're doing something right and righteous by doing so. That whole, well, we've got to take the lesser of two evils. No, you don't. You can point out to both teams that they're evil. The comment we got earlier from, I believe he was a buddy of yours, saying that we really need a viable third party. Oh, but that'll split the vote. So what? Let it split the vote. They'll learn their goddamn lesson if we do that. They'll learn their lesson. But as long as you have, again, the super powerful money that comes from the top, which is well above, Democrat and Republican parties, it comes from way bigger sources of money. As long as they're able to go, no, we're not going to, we're going to cut off their funds. The media will then go after this third party idea and shred it to pieces. And then people get their 28 words of that and go, okay, yeah, I'm just going to stick to my usual religion.
28 words. That's it.
28 words, man.
That's it.
So moving on. So I wanted to, it's actually a quarter after. I'm having a good time. You want to bring, I know that you had some ideas that you wanted to discuss too. I could keep going through these things, but let's talk about what you wanted to go over.
What did I want to go over?
I think
really
we've covered some of it.
To have a good conversation concerning anything that happens in the Skeptic tank, because pretty much there is up for grabs. And of course, my specialty is all cultural related. So that's why when we come into anything we're talking about, I'm looking at everything from a cultural perspective.
Well, then let's actually talk about what we were saying earlier here. This is so that you guys can all see. This is actually my OneNote notebook right here. And this is all the research. This is the research that I do on everything. This is almost 35 gigabytes at this point in terms of I research absolutely everything, because I want to know what I'm talking about. I don't want to come in, and that's why David, I actually saw that you had agreed that you would come and chat with us here. I think that'd be great. I'd really love to have your perspective culturally, and what is David's a finance professional, and I think I do not understand economics enough to have like a really broadly educated opinion on it, but David would. I think that would be really awesome. So let's go back to what I wanted to talk about today. We have, let's talk about the blacklisting.
Oh.
Yeah. So we have, and this is some really remarkable stuff. Let's go over this. We had, I actually have it pulled
really
up here.
culture war based for sure.
It is, and it really kind of shocked me. Let's start with what Robert Reich said. Robert Reich calls for Truth and Reconciliation Commission to erase Trump's lies and expose enablers. He said, when this nightmare is over, we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It would erase Trump's lies and comfort those who have been harmed by his hatefulness and name every official, politician, executive, and media mogul whose greed and cowardice enabled this catastrophe. I find this to be, as an actual history student, this is terrifying to me.
Why is that? Because I know you tell us why this is terrifying.
Well, hello, Colleen Gray has just joined us. You know Colleen, don't you, Dustin? Yeah. And welcome, Colleen. It's good to see you. Why this is let's start with what this, first of all, Truth and Reconciliation Commissions were created in, was it South Africa or was it Nigeria? Oh, man.
No, I think it was South Africa.
I think it might have been. And this is where you're actually brought before a tribunal of people who get to decide that what you have said and done, even if it isn't criminal, is morally reprehensible, and you need to pay for that. So,
it is South Africa.
It is South Africa. Okay.
So, the South Africa. The funny thing is that this was more of like you had to do community service or do something kind of specific. When they're looking at it.
No. This is actually. Let's move on to the rest. I'm putting. Well, and the South African idea, if I remember correctly, too, was to address human rights, grievous human rights violations and such. And again, these tribunals are more along the lines of morality policing. Thank you, David. South and Central. Yeah. This was about morality policing, at least in terms of Reich's interpretation of it. Because when I go, okay, exactly who needs to be comforted, who was harmed by the hatefulness, and I don't have any sort of objective understanding of any of that. I don't, because I don't react to these things. This guy did hurt this guy's feelings, so he should be paid or something. I don't know. But let's move on to the way this connects to. We also had Keith Olbermann. Trump supporters are maggots and must be prosecuted. Trump supporters. Now, we're not talking about people in government. The implication, at least from Reich, is that it's the people who worked in the administration that, fostered the lies and almost as if we were looking at a dictatorship that needs to be brought, in front of the Nuremberg Commission. You know what I'm saying? That's what it's almost like. That's the implication. At least that's the implication that I get. I could be completely wrong. So Olbermann is talking about just simply people who voted for him. Mr. Olbermann said Trump can and must be expunged. The hate he has triggered, the Pandora's box he has opened, they will not be so easily destroyed. So let's brace ourselves. The task is twofold. The terrorist Trump, the terrorist? Must be the terrorist, dude.
Well, what is if you picture it in your head, if you watch his video, give him a little black mustache and make him go like this. You tell me who kind of reminds you.
Oh, that's bad, man.
It's practically the same thing. And I've got, kid you not, I have family members who love this guy, and in my mind, I'm like, this is how far you have become detached from reality, or at least have some sort of like farming Dunning-Kruger effect. Because if you can't see a little black mustache on this guy right here saying what he's saying and going like this, if you cannot see the similarities, you've been subverted. And that's, of course, going back to my
Yeah, that's the whole critical theory idea right there. Is that you've internalized, your inability, you've internalized your support for Hitler-like figures.
Yeah, because
that's what they would say, without any foundation whatsoever.
No, without any foundation, because you've basically gotten to a point where you've been subverted so bad. And that's why I always make the joke. It's like, oh, well, Yuri Bezmenov called and said we need to move on to phase 3. You've already phase 2 now. We need to go on to 3. Even though that's all kind of an old joke. It's something I always tell people because they can't process past seeing what's real.
Well, let me continue here, because this is where some of the meat of it is for me. Yeah. We must defeat the terrorist Trump. Must be destroyed, must be devoured at the ballot box, which he was. And he and his enablers and supporters, his collaborators, and the Mike Lees, the William Barrs, and the Sean Hannitys, and the Mike Pences, and the Rudy Giulianis, and the Kyle Rittenhouses, this 17-year-old kid, too, and the Amy Coney Barretts, must be prosecuted and convicted and removed from our society while we try to rebuild it and rebuild the world that Trump has nearly destroyed by turning it over to a virus. There's some talk about some objectivity from somebody in media. That's remember, even though it means remembering that the fight does not end on November 3rd, but in many ways will only begin on that day. Okay, so let's also now go to this is David Adkins, a regional director for California Democrats, posted a tweet on Tuesday asking how to deprogram 75 million people who watch Fox News and presumably voted for Trump. Presumably, you got to love that. People who watch Fox News, we got to get them, because we're going to presume that they voted for Trump. That's awesome. This is the kind of objectivity that we're dealing with here. And I use objectivity in the most sarcastic possible way. He compared the task to what was done in post-World War II Germany or Japan. No, seriously, how do you deprogram 75 million people? Where do you start? Fox, Facebook? We have to start thinking in terms of post-World War II Germany or Japan, or failures of Reconstruction in the South. I studied as an academic discipline Reconstruction in the South. I'm not seeing any destruction that needed that kind of reconstruction, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, it's insane. So from here, we have AOC, and I forgot to pull it up, so I'm just going to find it. AOC Blacklist.
Good brain people, by the way. Love her. For the entertainment value, by the way.
So this is just 3 days after liberal New York rep. I wish they wouldn't do that. See, to me, again, that's disingenuous. I don't need you to tell me she's a liberal. I just need to tell you what she said. Yeah. Because when you frame it that way, the people who know will consume this are going to go, yeah, she's a liberal, which means liberals bad. Don't do that. Yeah. Let liberal ideas stand on their own. Let conservative ideas stand on their own. Stop doing this. I don't need you to police this shit and feed it to me. Most people don't. Personally, I am insulted by it on behalf of the rest of the people who don't realize they're being insulted. Maybe that's a little codependent,
I feel that way on framing whenever they have to inject a racial aspect.
Right. A black man was shot by police. How about we just, a man was shot by police?
Yeah.
Because it does two things. First, if they say it was a black man, that inspires people to say, yes, there's injustice there. And it also, for the people who don't, for racist pieces of shit, they go, see, another black man was shot by police and he deserved it. You see what I mean? It does two things. It spins for both consumers. We are consumers of this garbage. Yes. And so they're going, hey, how do we actually make sure that both sets of consumers are equally fed with this crap? That's what they do. And they do it on purpose, folks. This is not by accident. This is by design. They're telling you what it is you need to think. I hate that shit.
Oh, no.
So So I didn't even get past the third word here. Just 3 days, I'm going to skip the word liberal. Just 3 days after New York Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez urged the creation of a list of President Trump's, quote, sycophants, a top CNN hostess piled on with a warning that Trump aides battling the president's legal case should see their job possibilities dry up. Can you imagine that? It's like, okay, so you worked for the Trump campaign. I'm sorry, you don't get to have a job. Your family needs to starve. You're going to lose your shit because you worked for Trump. Yeah, right. Actually, I like this. Colleen brought up, this is good. I'm going to post this. I really like this feature. But profiling is bad. Well, no, it isn't if you are, at the top of the oppression pyramid. And since people who look like me are, then I need to pay for this kind of stuff.
The Hobbesian nightmare,
You should read Hobbes. I'm telling you, it's pretty grim stuff. So, Jake Tapper even suggested that sticking with Trump's legal fight could be seen as a character flaw that future employers would reject. So I'm essentially they're talking about making blacklists, and then those blacklists should be used to determine what kind of social punishment needs to be presented. Somebody simply because their ideas are different. So
it's the shaming.
This is the shaming. So
Shame.
Actually, no, I don't actually, David. When we can go down that road together, if you want, we can discuss that, because you and I see these things slightly differently, but I'd like to hear that perspective, but I'm not going to chase the bait. You want to cover up racialized extrajudicial murders, Christian? No, of course I don't. And I don't. And you also have to show me how that is exactly what is happening in every case. And if you can't, I'm not going to agree with that. That's objectivity. So we can have that discussion. I'd love to have it with you. You know that. And I will listen to you very carefully, man. This is something that you know about that I don't. But I'm not, that's something that no, of course you know better than that. So this is to what David said earlier. He said, in South Africa, if you told the truth and admitted your misdeeds, there was no punishment. David, are you familiar with Mao Zedong's struggle sessions? This was where people who were determined to have ideas that were not favorable to what Mao's regime and the Red Brigade were doing were to be brought out in front of the public in the public square, literally in the public square, in front of tens of thousands of people, their friends, their neighbors, their family, put up on a pulpit, and then publicly shamed. The Red Brigade, who was mostly college students, would get in their faces and tell them what they did was wrong, and you have to admit it. And if you admit that what you did was wrong, then you will not be punished. They would slap them, they would beat them, they would pour cold water on them, they would strip them naked. This is a struggle session. This is what Mao did. And the way you start that kind of thing is by creating blacklists like this one. That's how they started. Every big-time regime change in history that was orchestrated by a despot also included blacklisting their political enemies. Now, of course, we all make, if I was actually running for office, it'd be like, okay, who's going to come after me? In which case, you could make the argument that is also a form of blacklisting. It's what happens at the other end of the blacklist that these guys are talking about that I'm challenging here. Neither am I, David. I didn't bring up apartheid murders. You did. See, this is we should have the. I'm telling you, David, come on with me, man. Let's talk about it face to face. I would love to hear it.
It's funny because I keep seeing Troy's comments, and I'm like, Troy is in my head. I shit you not. Troy
should hop in here and bring some of these ideas with him, man. Come on, Troy, you know how to do it.
I feel like Troy's like my brother from another mother. He's totally in my head. Everything he posts, I'm like,
he's definitely the smartest guy that is on our team. There's no doubt.
No,
he's a smart dude, man.
He's in my world. I could definitely me and him need to. He's definitely in my world for sure.
So this is what bothers me, man. Is that these people are saying that, if you voted for Trump, you should be sanctioned. If you worked for Trump, you should be sanctioned. And what they're not able to do, unfortunately, David, again, I'm not talking, look, this is what David is arguing, which is not what I'm talking about. I was simply using a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Let's do it this way so that we can put this to bed real quick. Is that what Reich's talking about? Was he talking about covering up extrajudicial murders? No, he's not. He's talking about treating Trump this way, though. And this is what I'm taking. Now, if you want to educate me on how this worked with apartheid, I'm all about hearing it. Because as I have admitted to you many times before, I don't know the history like you do. So let's actually return to what's happening in this country. I am not about covering up murders of anything or anybody. That's not what I'm about. So what I'm talking about, though, is being sanctioned for having a different set of ideas. This is a nightmare. This man hurt these people's feelings. We need to... going on to list examples in more than 40 countries where truth and okay, here we go. 40 countries, not just South Africa, were used. The hope has been that restorative justice would provide greater healing than the retributive justice modeled most memorably by the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War. Concluded by claiming the United States needs a Truth and Reconciliation Commission because of centuries of enslavement, state-sponsored racism, denial of civil rights, and ongoing economic and social disparity. So these things here, we can argue these based on their merits. There are arguments for them. There are people who disagree with it. There are people who agree with it. And having objective arguments about those things, then we can decide how to do it. But in terms of it going, you will stand before this tribunal and admit that you were wrong, and then we won't punish you, isn't very different from what Mao did with the Red Brigade. What did the brown shirts do? The brown shirts also dragged political dissidents out into the middle of the public square and beat them, shot them, hung them, and while they were beating them, saying, if you admit that what you did and how you think is what it comes down to. It's not even about what you did. What
happened in Salem like this?
Yes, there was. You're talking about the cigarette manufacturer, right?
Well, something in Salem happened.
Salem. And that's not about boats. You're not talking about sailing them, right?
No. I believe it's kind of the same idea.
This is what Colleen is actually, she's encapsulated the point. The truth according to whom? That is my question. Truth is not objective and facts are not objective. So that's actually, it's funny because facts can be objective, but the end result of the, accumulating them into action can be subjective. Yeah, you know what I mean? Well, it depends on which school. Here we go with the philosophy stuff. Whether or not you're a utilitarian or a foundationalist or a correlationist, it just depends on how you see that philosophically. But the point being is that while we can probably all find things that the president did that we would find to be reprehensible, do those things do we need to drag the people who worked for him because that's what they do? Staffers the people who clean the toilets at the White House, do we want to include them too? What about the companies that provided Trump with his letterhead? Should we drag them in front of these, essentially these tribunals to have him, have them shamed for providing paper to this guy? Did you make the pens the president used to write his hateful speeches? How far do you want to go? That's the kind of shit that Lenin and Stalin did. Lenin not so much as Stalin, but that's what Stalin did. So how far do you want to take it? Is this really what we want to do? Or should we actually stick to the rule of law idea in which laws are broken? And when laws are broken, there are consequences and punishments are levied. When you break law, you have an objective outcome.
What's really weird is
and process.
They're literally going into this whole thing. This truth. Yeah. But this whole truth is, this truth and reconciliation thing. It's like, why would we go this far into somebody who's a temporary politician?
See, and you've seen, I use that term all the time. These are temporary politicians, man, and they're held to the same restraint that the last guy was and the guy before him. They tend to want to push those restraints as far as they can, and of course they do. They're in power. People in power push their restraints. That's what they do. Did this man break laws? Well, let's find out. I think during the the whole Russia Gate thing, if you want to call it that, the Mueller probe, that whole investigation, I kept saying, if this guy did this shit, he needs to be hung. And I don't mean well endowed. I mean at the end, maybe he is, who knows? But he needs to be at the end of a rope. And I'm not really concerned about that so much either. But the point being is that objectively, I wasn't sitting there defending this guy. I wanted to know the truth. And it seems to me that after all of the efforts were put out, they didn't make a very good case. So I went, okay, does that mean he was innocent? No. I haven't ever said he was innocent. I have said that he was not found. Get that? Because that's how that works. You're presumed innocent. You're not proven innocent. You're proven guilty. That whole, he wasn't exonerated. Of course he wasn't exonerated. The Mueller can't exonerate anybody. The police can't exonerate. The FBI doesn't exonerate people. They go, okay, your presumption of innocence remains. We were unable to prove your guilt. You don't prove that you didn't do something. Prove that you did. You see what I'm saying?
That's what sets us apart legally, is you're supposed to prove guilt. Not try and prove you're innocent. You're
right. No, yeah, and the idea is to create doubt of your guilt, not to prove that you're innocent. And that's so, and when you and this, and again, this leads me to I will return to this. The hardest thing for me to remain objective on is my own loathing for media and what it does to people. So I have to I pull myself in all the time, go, okay, make sure you're thinking carefully about this dude, because I don't really hate Trump or hate Biden. I don't hate liberals. I don't love none of that means much to me. They are really just trying to achieve their own ends. And they will do what it takes for them to get there. So, but when it is aided and abetted by a media who goes, hey, I know how we're going to get really, really rich on both groups of people. We're going to spin it both ways for them, and we're going to sell it to them, and we're going to watch them dance. That pisses me off. To me, it's irresponsible, and it's reckless, and it's insulting. So I've got to be very careful with this kind of stuff for myself. You know what I mean? So this is how it was presented to us, though, by people who know. Adam Schiff is an attorney. He knows goddamn well that he can't exonerate somebody with a probe. That's not how he knows that. The other thing that they all knew is the word collusion is not a legal term. They know that. It's conspire, conspiratorial. That's the word. Instead, they gave us a word that we would regurgitate so that we could feel like there was something nefarious happening, even if they weren't able to prove it. They did that to you people on purpose, America, and you keep voting for these assholes.
How long has this happened again?
What, almost 3 years that we went through that shit. And then I don't know if you saw it or not, but we did have a Kleinsmith, an attorney, a Justice Department, FBI attorney. He's an FBI, here, let me pull it up, Kleinsmith, was prosecuted already. Kleinsmith. He was an FBI attorney. Let's pull it up here. Judge accepts FBI lawyer's guilty plea for a false statement. He was already convicted of making false statements in the Mueller probe, or not the Mueller probe, but the investigation into the president's, I hate this word, collusion. In order to get a FISA warrant, he actually altered documents. He altered evidence in order to make that happen.
Yes.
And this didn't cause any outrage. Where's the fucking outrage, man? This is what these people are doing. They're the top cops, and nobody's pissed about this? You got to be kidding. Instead, we get the usual, oh, well, he's Trump, blah, 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 blah. Media organization, here, I love this. David, you're absolutely right. You're not thinking clearly. Media organizations exist to make money and grow an audience. I'm not mad and surprised when that's the thing I keep saying. What I'm mad and surprised about is that people just kind of bob their heads along with it. Because like I said to you earlier today, David, you know that, and I know that. What pisses me off is that those people in those organizations, not only, I mean, we're all allowed to make money. I don't have a problem with that. But what they're doing with that power that they have, shouldn't we be actually concerned about what power does with their power and how it affects us? So that being the case, what pisses me off and offends me is that not only that, I mean, yes, they're doing it. Okay, I'm going to backtrack because now I'm actually thinking, let me backtrack a second. Yes, it does piss me off because of the way they abuse their power. It doesn't piss me off that they're in business to make money. That doesn't bother me in the least. But shouldn't it bother us how they make their money? Whether or not it's being done ethically. And the only way that we stop them from doing that is by going, we think you're full of shit. Instead of going, yeah, because you don't like Orange Man and you say bad things about Orange Man, we go, yeah, and we're going to keep consuming your bullshit because we don't like Orange Man. That's what I'm talking about. And to me, that upsets me that people will do that too, that they'll just, like I've said before many, many times, you don't need to agree with me. That's not the point. But if you can say, look, I checked into this, I happen to agree with the way it's put, and here's why, I go, okay, cool. We can debate those points. That's objectivity. That's something we can do something with, rather than you tell me exactly what I already want to hear, and I'm going to vote that way. That's what bugs me. So this is what I'm talking about right here. So we're being told for the last several years now that the idea that the Trump campaign was set up is all bullshit. It's just right-wing conspiracy crap. Well, here's a lawyer who said that he actually altered evidence to get this FISA warrant against the president. He altered evidence. So doesn't it stand to reason that if one guy has said that this is what he did, this was the argument that we heard during the entire, there were 17 prosecutions of Trump associates. That shows that there's something bigger going on. Well, doesn't this also apply to that kind of logic? To me, it doesn't, but it is suggestive that we might want to look a little further. Objectivity says, okay, what we know is that this guy did that much. That's what we know. That doesn't mean we know that more was done, but it certainly does suggest that we might want to look into it. So this guy is actually, it looks like Durham has found some more shit and is dragging him back into court. At the time, I believed that the information I was providing in the email was accurate, but I am agreeing that the information I entered into the email was not originally there and that I inserted that information. In other words, you altered evidence. You asshole. I love the little dance that he did. Well, the words weren't there, and then I stuck them in there. You altered evidence? Okay.
Sounds like what a toddler does when they've been busted. Well, it just happened to be this way, and I did X. And, you kind of have this falling backwards kind of bullshit. And that's what's weird about this is when we read these. Actually, I'm going to kind of stop there. What's fascinating is what I find fascinating about this is that after 3 years of this, how much money do you think we spent on this?
Well, some numbers say 30 million, some say 40, some say 50. I really don't know, because I guess we could go to the GAO website and find out. But let's say it's the bottom number in 30 million.
It's significant. It's a significant number.
That's an expensive lawsuit.
You imagine if it actually paid out.
Right.
I mean,
then I wouldn't be pissed. It'd be like, that was 30 million well spent.
Yes.
You went after this guy who we were told by Rachel Maddow is an asset of the Kremlin. That he was actually, and do you remember when the Mueller report came out and people were angry that they didn't find that our president was an asset of the Russian government? I'm going, what the fuck is wrong with you people?
I was dying laughing. I was like,
I'll be honest with you, I really didn't know what to expect up till that point. But when I read the report, and I did read it, I went, this is not surprising to me. This sounds like what presidents do.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, there's a level of hypocrisy. And of course, we have talked about this before concerning past, a lot of liberals will usually say, well, it's called a whataboutism. We can't go back and blah, blah, blah. Well, it's neither here nor there.
Only he that shall not be named says that. And you know who I mean.
Yeah. So what about, as soon as someone presents the argument of, or their argument is, well, you can't say that because it's a whataboutism, it's like, well, no, whataboutism is the same as being deflective, meaning you
It's a
have
straw
an
man.
argument. Yeah, it's a straw man. You don't want to look at the evidence that's presented. But that's what we're looking at through 3.5 years of a Trump indictment, going through what ended up being an actual impeachment process. Well,
Mm-hmm.
not impeachment. Let's get that correct. It was an impeachment process. They impeached, but it went nowhere over things that were literally. And what's really interesting, and this is something that I saw going through this whole process, was that it was very media driven through a narrative. I think if people actually looked at what was being provided and the evidence that was actually being provided to the DOJ, they'd been literally going like, why are we actually going through this whole process? This is
Well,
bullshit.
because of the religious nature of politics.
Yes.
Oh, the right, they're bad. They're just making all this shit up. This is something I wanted to actually bring up earlier. To your point, because this is kind of what this is where that division is at. Is that one team truly believes that their team isn't capable of that kind of corruption, but that only the other one is.
Their
And
team
it's
is
like,
not able to
are you
deploy.
nuts? Why wouldn't they be? These people are all struggling for the same power. Why wouldn't they all be ripping us off and lying to us the same? Another one of our friends, actually, Troy is going to join us here in a minute. Another one, yeah, one of our mutual friends says, "Well, you try and say that everything's always equal, between them." I'm like, "No, it's not equal. They choose different ways to fuck you over. That's all it is. They have different methods of doing it."
I mean, it just depends on, and that's the thing is when we talk about temporary politicians and we look at these situations, and me and you've talked about this. You've talked about it. Oh, there's Troy right there.
There's Troy. Welcome.
Welcome, Troy.
Finish your point, though, there, Dustin.
Uh, it's really kind of strange how much a lot of people, a lot of the population, will put so much precedent into a temporary politician as. And I think I said it once, and you like that comment. There's a vast difference between someone being a leader and someone being
A drone.
a drone dictator. And when you put so much on a pedestal, so to speak, at that point you end up putting them in charge. So I think it had something to do with the lockdowns. You know what I'm talking about? If they were actually leaders, they would be locked down. But if they're not, then
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
And we've seen more and more of these as of late. Lately, we've had it was Newsom got busted, Pelosi got busted, Lighthouse got busted, the mayor of San Diego got busted, the mayor of Austin got busted, and I think you're right. This is again, we've been hearing for the last 4 years about how Trump's not a leader, and frankly, I have to agree, he was not. He was way too divisive to be a leader of this country. He preyed upon that split. We're going to other these people. You're my people. They're not. And that was actually why he didn't get reelected, if you ask me. But the point being is that a leader would go, I have to do what I'm telling you to do. But they're not leading us. They're actually dictating to us. It's different.
Right.
And why wouldn't they expect revolt? Why wouldn't they expect people to be angry and take it to the streets, which is what they're doing? They're doing it all throughout Europe, enlightened and selfless Europe. How those Europeans they care for one another so much that they'd never do that. They're burning their own cities to the ground right now, in like 5 or 6 different countries in the EU. So anyway, I think I might have gotten a little off subject, which I tend to do. Hello, Troy. How are you, man?
Troy.
Hello, good evening. Interesting conversation tonight. We're not seeing the
Pull your mic away from your mouth just a little bit, bud. Just a little bit.
Seeing a little bit more.
Actually, it sounds like you're not even on your mic. That's the camera microphone. Almost guaranteed. Tap your mic. Tap it. Yeah, I'm not hearing it. That's not that.
Okay.
It's the camera, which is fine. So anyway,
Anyway,
you were saying
you were saying about what's going on in Europe. We're not seeing that yet here, at least not for that reason. But what happened in was at Staten Island a few days ago, last days, where they arrested the restaurant owner.
Yeah.
close to a border where the business a couple blocks away, they can be open for
2
business.
blocks away, restaurants are open for business, right? Yeah.
What?
And so it's actually kind of affirming to see a bunch of New Yorkers show up and protest, this in the street, because I would hope this is a common thing. It's like we can't let the government say rules for thee but not for me. You stay at home, and I'm going to go have this dinner with these lobbyists, and we're not going to wear masks or social distance or anything. And it's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, and the more that people suffer, the more that it's going to blow up in their face, and it won't matter what political party they're affiliated with. This is where that religion will break down. This is where it won't matter that it is Democrat mayors or Republican president. It won't matter when I'm about to get kicked out of my house. My family hasn't eaten in 3 days. My savings is gone. I paid my rent last month with a freaking credit card. That's when this will no longer matter. That's when the pitchforks and the torches come out, and it doesn't matter who's sitting up there with those lobbyists at that fancy restaurant. They're going to get poked and burned. So again, from the perspective of just historically, these people up there know. This is what my point earlier. Circle back around a little bit to where I was saying that Adam Schiff is an attorney. He knows damn well that collusion is not a legal term. He knows that. So did most of them that were arguing that stupid point. They knew what they were doing, and they were feeding it to you so that you'd regurgitate it. And people did. So that's what I'm talking about with the people that are doing the same thing here. Wasn't it Austin's mayor who actually flew to Cabo for his daughter's wedding and then had like this big party and shit? I'm just going, what the hell is wrong with you? Don't you realize that the plebs are going to revolt? And so the more that this continues, that's
then when he gets caught, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that.
I know, and I love their apologies. I'm like, no, you're sorry you got caught, you Nimrod, and we all know it. Again, you're insulting us. You should have said, I really should be doing what I told you to do. That's where, my ego drove me to do these things because of the position I'm in. You guys elected me to do something different. Be honest about it. Oh, gee, I'm so sorry. This was a real terrible lapse in my judgment. No, it wasn't. You knew what you were doing. You planned it. Who was it? Oh, the one I just saw today, and I can't remember which mayor it was actually filming his directions, the directive to stay at home from his hotel, wherever he was at.
Yes.
He'd gotten out. Was that the mayor of Austin? Was it the same guy who flew to Cabo? And he was giving the directive, everybody needs to stay home and social distance. And that video came from his freaking hotel.
You guys need to stay home.
So yeah, we're just the plebs, man. We're the people here on the bottom. And I love Mike here is saying we need to, this is great. Okay. We need to bring back tar and feathers. You know what, man? I don't know about you guys. You ever see that? It was a miniseries called John Adams. It was really awesome. But there was a scene in there of the tar and feathering that was taking place of the tax collectors during the king's taxes. What were they calling them? The reprehensible acts, right? And I was going, man, that would be really freaking horrible. That's hot tar. They're pouring it all over your skin, man. You're never going to recover from that. You'll have third-degree burns.
Yep.
Ugh. Maybe we shouldn't, Mike. Let's not bring back tar and feathering. Public hangings are a lot more humane and satisfying, too. So
we have some pretty good modern products that would approximate tar without being hot. We can make it work.
Just cover them in glue, In any case, Troy has been actually doing... This has been interesting to me because, and this is going to, I want to make this the last segment that we do tonight. We've been on for quite a while, and it's great to see. Look at all the participation we've gotten. This has been really cool. But Troy has been following what's happening with the election and the kind of. There's obviously some things that we need to be aware of as voters. I don't like saying, look, there's proof of widespread anything any more than I like saying, look, there's no evidence of widespread. Stop saying widespread. That's a bullshit term that's designed to qualify the statement. And stop saying voter fraud because, and I don't know about you, but I looked it up. And I brought this up on the live stream that we did 2 weeks ago, Troy, that voter fraud is a specific legal term. and it covers a certain range of things so that I can be
individual
protected.
People who are voters, not
That's right. Not
the
not
election
en
system.
masse.
That's different.
And the actual term for what it is that we're seeing is electorate fraud, which is different, and it's not being used. And because
Tim Pool even failed on that. I watched him today. He said voter
really?
fraud, and I was like, no, that's election fraud, dude.
Yeah.
legal term.
I did. That's what I'm saying, Tim Pool.
So what is electoral and voter fraud? I'm just going to share it with everybody so that you all know what I'm talking about here. I'm going to share my screen. Again, this is good stuff. So, voter fraud is the illegal behavior of individual voters, such as duplicate voting, when somebody impersonates another voter to vote twice, vote selling, when a voter offers to vote a certain way for pay, which we actually have seen some evidence of. But again, the word widespread is then interjected as if that doesn't, this disenfranchises people, whether it's widespread or not. And because there is no definition of the word widespread, what does that mean? Is that 100 people, 50, 10,000? Yeah.
Christian, this is something that I have an absolute problem with. This is that actual word widespread. Because I've had this conversation with several people, and I'm like, so what exactly constitutes?
What's widespread mean? They can't
mean?
tell you.
No one can tell you what that means. Is it every county, every voter, just certain counties, just certain states? Is it just the swing states? Non-swing states? This is bullshit. If you're going to sit there and you can see, if you watch any media report concerning whatever Trump's trying to throw through as far as fraud goes, or improprieties, or whatever you want to call it,
or just sloppiness. I mean, I see a lot of sloppiness.
It's awful. For me, this is me as an American, as the constitutional American. This is like, even one county with about 120, 130 fraudulent votes is bad. I don't need it to be widespread.
10 is bad. 5 is bad.
Yeah,
These are people.
I don't care.
Isn't this the country of one person, one vote? Isn't this, don't you disenfranchise people when you do this kind of stuff?
Yes.
I don't care. I don't care who wins. That doesn't matter.
There's more than just that one qualifier of widespread. It's also because the court system wants to know if the fraud, if there's alleged fraud, if it will overturn an election. If they're not, they're not interested in it. So widespread voter fraud, that would change the results of the election.
Yeah. Have you noticed that has been added lately?
Bill Barr just had said that a few days ago, and and the press jumped all over it. Hey, well, and Trump's attorney general even said there was no widespread voter fraud. It's like, no, that's not what he said.
No, that's not what he said. He said
overturn the election. That's like saying, if I said there's no rotten food in your fridge, I'm not saying there's no food in your fridge.
Well, I like the way Tim Pool framed it. He said, well, I smell smoke. You need to send the fire department. Well, is there evidence of widespread fire? Well, no, but I smell smoke. There's fire somewhere. But is there evidence of widespread fire? Because if there's not, there's no reason for the fire department to come. But I smell smoke. There's fire somewhere. If there's smoke, yes, but is it widespread? I'm laughing going, yeah, that's pretty good. That's actually pretty smart. So now David is actually saying a working definition of widespread is one that would change the outcome. Fine, let's say that that's the case. Doesn't it still make sense that we investigate fraud, impropriety, and sloppiness in our electoral system?
So Arizona, they did that sample examination balloting, and out of 100 ballots, they found 2 that were wrong. The duplicate ballots, the ones that they fixed because the ballots were damaged somehow and couldn't go in the machine.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So they duplicated them. Out of 100, they found 2, so that's 2%. So right there is enough to overturn the results of the presidential election in Arizona.
Based on the electoral system.
Yeah,
is that what you're arguing?
Okay. But basically, it's within the 2% margin. So right there.
And at the same time, while I don't like it, it's actually, that's to be expected in a system like what we have. Did you see that I posted a couple of days ago that Canada and the European Union do not allow vote by mail the way we do, for the very reason that it according to the Prime Minister of Canada, according to the officials in the EU, it's because it opens them up for fraud.
Yeah,
And I've been saying this for a
reason
year.
our own commission with former Secretary of State James Baker, former President Carter, said for that exact reason that we should avoid that kind of voting system.
Yeah.
So
And yet here we are.
So again, the problem here again is we have two factions. We've got two groups of religious people. We've got people that think that if we say this, it's because we wanted Trump to win. I don't really give two shits which one of these two assholes wins. Now, I know that you guys might feel differently, but I don't. I want to know if there has been impropriety. I want to know if there has been rigging. That's what I care about. I really don't care which temporary politician wins this spot. Here's a great example. One of the first things that Trump did that was so outrageous was overturn a whole bunch of Obama's executive orders. So we had Obama for 8 years, and this guy comes in and he says, nope, we're not doing this anymore. That tells you how much pervasiveness a president actually has. You know what I'm saying? So Biden's saying he's going to do the same thing. So why would I care? I don't really care. If Congress was fucking around like that, I'd have a lot to say about it. These are my representatives. The president doesn't represent me. He represents the corporation that is the United States of America. He represents the U.S. military. He is the mouthpiece for the Congress. You see, but the Congress is our mouthpiece. So I'm not really too concerned. So that's part of the problem, is that we can't say, can we have an actual conversation about whether or not there's been mistakes? Whether or not the system that we're currently using is a wreck, or whether it's solid and sound. I just want to know those things. It has nothing to do with Trump. I don't care. Maybe, like I said, maybe you guys do. So you might want to offer a different perspective on this. But that's where I'm at with it.
Well, if it was me, I would only care concerning. I personally would. I don't really care who wins as far as the election fraud situation goes. If it's Biden, okay, it's Biden. If it's Trump, okay, it's Trump. As a person, as an individual, mine's more leaning towards the critical theory EO. I'm a selfish person. That's where it's leaning. So of course there's going to be something kind of deep inside where it's like, I kind of hope he wins, because I know Biden's going to shit can that thing as soon as it's there, and then we're going to have a whole confusing mess of intersection.
Well,
I would rather know that Biden won legitimately than
me too.
anything else. If he did,
I honestly think that based on even, Troy has been doing a lot of research on this. That's why I wanted you to come in and talk, and I'll give you the whole pulpit to yourself here in a second. David says this: we can easily get rid of impropriety by not making the vote anonymous. We were just talking about people on blacklists. So now who are you going to terrify into not voting, because now their voting record will be public? No thanks. It needs to be anonymous for this reason. And the reason it's anonymous is because the King of England used to do that to people. And previous kings before him, obviously. So anyway, go ahead. You over the last few days, Troy, have been sending me a bunch of your research, and unfortunately, I have been unwell, and then we had this debacle with the water heater in my house, which, oh my God, not being able to take a shower for, I'm not even going to tell you how long, left a permanent stench stain. It's funny. I find it's like, hot water, I'm going to take a shower. Why do I still smell bad? And I came up with, I think this is going to be the name of my new band, Stench Stain. It's a stench stain. It won't go away even if you scrub it off. So
I think your camera switched on you there, Christian.
What do you mean?
Because I'm not seeing. I see your hand. I see your hand. I don't see you.
That's probably not a bad thing. So anyway, go ahead and just give us the rundown of what it is that you've discovered, Troy, because you know a lot about this at this point.
I'll be right back. Keep going, Troy.
There's a lot of there's a lot of different pieces going on in all these swing states. Of course, the most newsworthy new item is the surveillance video from the State Farm Center in Georgia, where right off the bat that complaint come out that hey, we were kicked. They kicked us out. They told us they weren't counting anymore. Come back in the morning, and then they did count, and that was that was denied, but here's video showing it. And not only that, but it's very suspicious that they only drew boxes of ballots that were hidden underneath the tablecloth.
Yeah, so let's rewind just a little bit. And this was in Pennsylvania, was it not?
No, this was in Georgia.
This was in Georgia, that's right. So for those of you who aren't aware, evidently, was this the night of the election during the count?
Yes, it was during the count at 10 o'clock at night. They kicked the poll watchers out and the press.
The poll watchers were told to leave because they were done counting. Exactly. As soon as the poll watchers were kicked out, they began counting again and pulled hidden bins of ballots out from underneath the tables. And there is video of this. So, and the video is actually it's pretty clear, but at the same time, I really need to see what an investigation says about it. So, it's like, okay, that is definitely reason for me to be concerned, but I need them to it's kind of like the Kyle Rittenhouse video. Oh, he was there to shoot black people. That's what they originally said. No, he wasn't. And I didn't think he was. It was entirely possible when they brought it up, but over time, what he was there doing actually was clearly revealed. So that's why I'm saying that.
Yeah, well, the State Farm Center one, that's going to be hard to get around or hard to explain away because under Georgia law, the counting has to be available to the public, but they told the press to go home, and they have to be available to the poll watchers, which they told those to go home. So all of that counting that went on for those 3 or 4 hours was an illegal act as far as election law.
Well, wouldn't that, now I'm not an attorney, that was actually my aim in going back to school, but I'm not one yet. Could that not actually say, look, in that being the case, we don't know what other kind of fraud took place. Let's say this is true. Let's say it turns out that these ballot counter, the people who are there to count the ballots, broke the law by kicking out the poll watchers and then resuming the count, that they actually lied to the poll watchers in order to get rid of them so they could resume the count, and that they had hidden bins of ballots. Let's say that those things are true. Wouldn't that constitute, we need to actually run this election again in that state? Because we don't know what else could be broken. If you can show that there is fraud here, does that not invalidate? And I don't know what Georgia law says. So wouldn't that be one of those potential arguments? Is that if that can be proved to be the fact, wouldn't that invalidate the entire thing?
Right. And the constitutional solution for that is supposed to be, and at least in the Supreme Court precedent supports this, is for the state assembly to step in and not send electors or send the electors that they feel should have went.
And that's the argument that the administration's making now, right, is that they're saying you need to either not send the electors or you need to pick new ones, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's in Georgia. In Arizona, we have we have that case, and I think a guy we're fans of, Robert Barnes, I think he advised on that lawsuit. He said he didn't draft it, but he actually was involved advising on that. And that's I'm not sure if it's a state congresswoman or a federal, a state representative or a congresswoman that was bringing that suit. But with that sample of the duplicate ballots they got ordered, they showed enough. There's enough of an issue there to pursue it further.
So, and that's like, let's take what David's saying here. Georgia election officials, including Republican voting system implementation manager Gabriel Sterling, publicly disputed claims that the video shows fraudulent activity. My question for David do you take the word of power on this, or would you prefer to see I want to see this investigated. If it turns out the investigation says no, it turns out that what you were seeing was not what was happening. But I don't care if the guy in charge was a Republican or not. That means nothing. Again, that's what I was saying earlier when the New York Post... The guy in
charge also left it before the press left. So there's that.
Did he really?
Yeah.
See, I don't know these things. This is why I wanted you to come on and talk to me about what you found, because what you were sending me in messages was like, whoa, that's a lot. The point being is that, okay, wouldn't it make sense? Let's just look at this again critically. I'm a skeptic. So I look at this. Georgia election officials, including a Republican voting system implementation manager, Gabriel Sterling, publicly disputed these claims. wouldn't it mean that he'd lose his freaking job if that's what was going on? Couldn't this actually make him a sacrificial lamb? I'd be going, nope, I didn't see that either. You know what I
Right.
mean? I'm going to cover my ass. Why would we trust anybody in power here? I don't know why you would. Do you?
Not only that,
David?
but another issue in Georgia is, and I remember this from election night on Fox News when they said, "Oh well, apparently a water main burst in the State Farm Center, and they're going to stop counting early," which was complete BS. There was a small toilet leak like at 8 in the morning. And there was no water main leak that shut down the counting activities at the center. It didn't
Well, how do we
happen.
know
It's
that?
a complete lie because of FOIA requests down there in Georgia locally, and they looked up the service calls and stuff, and there was no water main break. There was only a toilet leak in a bathroom on the other end of the building that morning.
So that wouldn't
yeah.
have had an effect on the nighttime activities.
No,
of the
absolutely not.
So
It's
right here,
completely
David's
different
saying,
area.
he's quoting, the 90-second video of election workers at State Farm Arena purporting to show fraud was watched in its entirety, which is hours, by the
14
Georgia
hours.
Secretary of State investigators. Great, it was watched. So what did they say? When are they going to release it to the public? This should be something that we are all allowed to examine, no? And again, I'm being a skeptic. I'm not saying it's wrong. I don't have enough information to say that it's right or it isn't. I am skeptical of power always, because power has something to gain. And power wants to, gain that at our expense, always. So I'm simply being skeptical. David, honestly, if I were to say what I think based on the little bit of information that you're providing, it's probably going to turn out that the length of the video reveals something slightly different. Gives us a different interpretation. That's likely. That's like, again, you guys remember when the Kyle Rittenhouse videos were released in their entirety and a timeline was put together based on, who I'm talking about, the kid. For you guys who don't remember, Kyle Rittenhouse was the 17-year-old kid in, I want to say, Minnesota, right? Carrying an AR-15 that ended up killing 2 people and wounding another, purportedly in self-defense. When the first video was released, it was like, oh, he was there hunting people, and he was there because he's a racist, and he was there, he wanted to carry his gun to hurt people. And then later, when the rest of the video came out and they put together a timeline, a different story began to emerge. And again, I don't want to say whether I know for a fact that he wasn't doing what was originally purported, but it's certainly another case was presented in that it was self-defense. Somebody actually fired first. Somebody came after him first. Somebody tried to grab his weapon. Was the idiot there with a gun that shouldn't have been? Yes. I'm sorry, man. You don't go carrying your AR-15 into a crowd like that. What are you, dumb? I have a personal problem with it as an AR-15 owner. I have one. And would I have done something even remotely that dumb? No. So the point being is that when the rest of that video was revealed, we got a different story. So I'd like to see what the rest of this video says. Troy, have you seen any more of that video? Is there any more to it than what the 90-second video shows so far?
Well, it's 14 hours of video, and
we're not going to watch it.
I watched a half hour, the half hour hearing in front of the Georgia legislature where it was presented, and they went through it. So I haven't seen the full 14-hour video, but I've seen the entire presentation that was given to the Georgia legislatures.
So and again, what we're going to get.
But what has to be explained is, why are you processing ballots against the
after
election laws when the people aren't there who are required to be there by law?
So and that is the question, and that's a question I'd like to see answered. And again, we've got to stop making the mistake that if somebody says something like this, it's because they want the other guy to win. Why can't it just be that we're all concerned Americans about what's happening with our electoral system? And if it turns out that none of this stuff actually amounts to much, isn't that great? It's kind of like that. Well, it turns out the president, this guy says the president isn't an asset to the Kremlin. Boy, does that piss me off. That's so stupid. Isn't it the same thing? If it turns out that there was no fraud. What's that, Dustin?
It's the same thing.
It is the same thing, isn't it? So shouldn't we all be like, oh, great relief, good. We've got a new president. It looks like everything was above board. Wouldn't you accept that? I would. Provided that those investigations revealed that.
And then but there is a pattern to these, and at least so there's that video in Georgia, but then and we know about what happened in Detroit, Michigan, where they put poster boards up over the windows, and they ushered electors out. They found reasons to try and get ushers or usher the poll watchers, Republican poll watchers out. There was an immigrant. She was a Republican poll watcher, but she said that people assumed that she was a Democrat, especially once she got her credentials that said independent on it. Mm-hmm. And so she was treated as if she was on the Democrat team, or people opened up to talk to her.
So they were speaking freely.
They were speaking freely about kicking these a-hole Republican poll watchers out. So they couldn't see what's going on, or they would come in and say that there's a food truck or catering here or whatever, and you can go eat, and then they wouldn't let the Republican poll watchers back in. So then we have that same pattern in Philadelphia, where they would not let Republican poll watchers in, or they would find ways to block them or kick them out. So.
Well, and again,
objectively, I'm just pointing out there is a pattern that emerges that, and Atlanta should be statistically should match up with other cities on how the vote splits, and it doesn't. And the same thing with Philadelphia, and the same thing with Detroit. Could there be other explanations for it besides fraud? Of course there could be, but we shouldn't just say, nothing happened here, so just move on, forget about it. That's unacceptable. We have to have the answers to these things.
Is it mildly ironic that those who are saying nothing happened here are the ones that are winning?
No, and this has been my contention the whole time. It's like, you know what? I would be saying the exact same things if Trump won, and we saw the same patterns. I'd be saying the same thing. I'd be going, wait a minute, something is not right here. The same, and just like I said during the whole Russia investigation, I was going, if this dude did this stuff, he needs to go. We need to fry his ass. I don't, this isn't about a team. I don't, you know what? I play for a team, Americans. That's my team. You all are, and I don't really care if we differ on our opinions or not. We all should actually be united on issues like this one. So I appreciate the input, though, Troy, and I'm glad you joined us to explain that, because, and we should probably actually cover some of it again. I have a feeling we're going to be going through this for a while. I don't see that this is going to end. And then here, see, this is where David is one of the smartest people I know. Like, seriously, he really is. And he says dumb stuff like this. Whoops, that was Mike. Losers always complain. But then again, actually, I should retract that by saying you're right. They do. And so this is actually, but I think you just kind of made the point. Why would Biden's team go, you know what, you're right. There is some things here we don't like. There's inconsistencies. Because he won. Why would he want to investigate any of this stuff? So you're right, David. Actually, if that's where you're coming from on it, but otherwise I was going to say, boy, that's a dumb thing to say. Sorry about that, man.
And so actually, the one congressman that's a plaintiff in the Pennsylvania suit, he won his election, and that actually held well with the court, because it's like he actually has something to lose with this. Yeah, at least at the trial level, at the bottom level. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the appeals court dismissed it with prejudice. Then it went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. They dismissed it with prejudice, which is ridiculous to dismiss with prejudice when there hasn't been any evidentiary hearing. Generally, if you're going to dismiss with prejudice, you should have a reason why you're dismissing with prejudice, and they were doing it on technicalities, and that's not good enough.
Well,
but it is up for cert with the U.S. Supreme Court. Alito has already chimed in on it, so he definitely wants to take this, because he ordered. He already put an order in on this that separate the mail-in ballots, or the disputed mail-in ballots, the ones that arrive after Tuesday at 8 p.m. on election day. To separate those, and a lot of counties didn't. So I'm sure he's chomping at the bit
Well, can
hear
you
this
answer
case.
this? Can you, Troy? Can you answer this? David says all of these challenges have been dismissed by the courts. Is that right? Have all of these challenges been dismissed by the courts? If they are, why are we spinning our wheels?
I don't think they've.
Well, I mean,
all of
I just mentioned a live one right now. Has it been dismissed previously? Yes. It's not a Trump case. It's brought by Sean Cornell and I can't remember the other, but it's several
Yeah, you're right.
Republicans who were affected by the election, and and of course what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said. Oh well, you brought the suit after election, so you don't have standing. It's like, but if they brought it before, they wouldn't have standing. And they said, well, this was passed, this Act 77 that implemented this voting system, that was passed a year ago in September of 2019, and you should have addressed it then. But it's absolutely ridiculous because it was the Pennsylvania Supreme Court that changed Act 77 this September and October. It's absolute outrage that they would turn around and say to parties affected, well, you don't have standing after the election because it's been around a year. No, it hasn't been around a year. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court changed it and said, no, you don't need to check the signatures on these ballots, for one thing. For another thing, they said, oh, well, the heck with the Constitution that says election day is on this day until 8 p.m. We're going to keep on accepting ballots for another 3 days. That is crap.
How do you really feel, Troy?
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
That really ticks me off. That the court, under the Pennsylvania Constitution, under the U.S. Constitution, it is the legislature who decides the time and manner of elections, not the judiciary. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court way overstepped the separation of powers this fall by just changing the rules. But it was also done. This was I can't remember the name of the Democrats' lawyer who went around the nation trying to force these rules. Well, I mean, they even sued Democrats in Las Vegas. It was a Democrat election official in Las Vegas during the primaries who they sued to take voters who had been recently stricken from the rolls, who are verified, no longer living there by the post office, and put them back on the rolls to just mail out unsolicited ballots there.
So this is. Go ahead, Dustin.
No, there's no chain of custody.
Right, and this is what I've been explaining about. We've had mail-in balloting for a long time. No, we haven't. We've had absentee ballot voting, which is different. There is a chain of custody there. You have to request one, and it is delivered to the place that you requested it from. There is a way to track it. So that is different. And again, it becomes partisan, which to me is bizarre. The idea that pushing back is because you love Trump or you hate Biden is stupid. There are people who do see it that way. Troy, your outrage right there was about the way the court treated the law.
Yes.
You didn't bring up Trump. You didn't say anything about it. That's right. That was your beef. That was your passion. Speech was about the law, about the way we all have to follow. It has nothing to do with what outcome you would prefer. So how come it is we have to treat things this way? I actually think what I know about David actually is that I think he's actually being the devil's advocate. He's giving us food for thought, and I appreciate that. But I have to say, this is where I'm going to say, David, David's talking about what Barr said. In the past, David has said, we can't trust anything Barr says. Well, now we can trust this because it says something David likes. That is what I'm talking about. Personally, I listened very carefully to what Barr said, and we ran it down earlier. He said that right now, meaning at this point in their investigation, they aren't finding any evidence of voter impropriety, fraud, etc., that would dramatically change the outcome of the election. Well, let's listen to what he said then. What he said was right now, there isn't evidence that they haven't found anything that would, so what? If they found stuff that wouldn't dramatically change the outcome of the election, but was still fraudulent, or still sloppy, or still reckless, doesn't that mean anything to us as Americans? Shouldn't we care about that?
It would to me.
It would to me.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't matter who we're voting for at that point. What matters is that every person that voted, it was a legitimate vote. That somebody wasn't doing something to screw that up. Like inflate the vote, fraudulent vote, improprieties, whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter at that point. And that's where I always, anytime I hear
right, because it takes away from you, it takes away from your vote, it takes away from my vote.
That's right.
Every single illegal or
sloppy. Let's just say
vote,
sloppy counts.
Every fraudulent vote takes away the power of my vote and your vote.
So, and this is the last. And I just actually, I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but I got the word from the wife that it's, I'm being reeled in. It's dinner time. The family's waiting to eat. So, but I do want to say this, and I think this is really what it all comes down to for me. And I don't know. I'm going to toss it out there, and maybe we can discuss this again tomorrow night or at a different time. But why wouldn't people that spend $1 billion screw around with the elections? Why wouldn't they? Let's think about that. How come it is that we trust one side to do things right and the other side to do things wrong? Why? That doesn't make any sense to me. When I pull back and look at it and go, you spent $1 billion, you had these people invest in the outcome of you being elected, but we're to believe that hundreds of people, to Donnie Howell's point, hundreds of people that have sworn affidavits that they saw this kind of stuff going on are all just shills for one side. They're not shills for the other side. The other side doesn't do this. Only this side does. Only the Trumpsters are doing this. And it's like, that's really dumb. I cannot get my mind around that lack of logic.
But that gets to how important the point of having your poll watchers there, your Democrat poll watcher, your Republican poll watchers, your minority and majority representative, your judge of elections. That's why it's so important, because we shouldn't trust them. The billions of dollars or access to power aside, we shouldn't just have blind trust. That's why it's important that these things are followed, that poll watchers are allowed to watch the vote in a meaningful way, and not just, oh, it's okay that they're present in this huge warehouse-sized room and can't see a darn thing that's going on.
Yeah.
Well, and this actually goes back to, again, it's the same thing that I kind of tie it all together into the same thing. We've got two things that we're dealing with here, which is basic human psychology. People are driven by two things: anger and fear. And anger is generally a byproduct of fear. And this is, Sun Tzu knew this when he wrote The Art of War. That was written 4,000 years ago. And the techniques that he detailed within, except for the honorable use of this knowledge, that's what he wrote about, are being used against us to this day. And so that being the case, we have an electorate that goes, Republicans are not just wrong, they represent evil. I've heard people say this, and I'm like, that's really fascinating to me that you can... Colleen earlier said that generalization is one of the big problems that we face, in terms of an educated electorate, et cetera. I think that's the context that she was saying that in. And that is, to say that I'm an evil guy. Yeah, I'd love to do a TV commercial. Hi there, my name's Christian. I'm evil. And because of it, I'm a registered Republican. Are you evil too? Are you evil as well? Well, if you are, come join us at the RNC. You'll find all of your dastardly friends here doing the evil stuff that they do. Yeah, man. So, again, when you break things, for me, I have said this about Troy, is that I'll look at something and say, is there any reason for me to look at it? Because if it doesn't mechanically fit at the most cursory examination, then I'm not going to dig too much further into it, because generally things on the surface reveal themselves to work or they don't. But the idea that a party generates and is the sole purveyor of evil is so laughable it actually hurts. It makes me want to laugh to the point where I'm crying about it, because that people genuinely feel this way about something. The Democrat Party isn't evil either.
There's precedents in other countries, but not here in America.
Well, but was that about, so let's actually, again, that's an exercise in critical thought to me. Is that about the party or about the people? You see what I'm saying? Was the Nazi party evil, or was it the people who created it evil to begin with and then perpetuated it? You see what I'm saying?
It was both because when Hitler gave his speeches, he would feed off the crowd, and if he was going in a direction that he wasn't getting the energy from the crowd, that he would repeat the things against the Jews because he got a reaction out of the crowd for it.
That's so funny too.
It was a symbiotic relationship. I don't buy the the narrative that it was just the party itself. I mean, there was a lot of underpinnings.
That's what I'm talking about.
World War I that went into it, but yeah, I couldn't just blame the party or just one or the leader of the party for.
Dustin, you're going to have to crank your mic if you want. Troy's is really loud, so we can barely hear you.
I can always get in real close.
And we love the sound of your voice.
Oh, yes. My mother-in-law is from Darmstadt, Germany, and she kind of said something relatively similar to what Troy said to my wife, that the enigmatic outcome, because he was so presentable, fed off the audience. That was part of his appeal, was his ability to rally.
That was his appeal. Because otherwise he was a terrible strategist and a poor politician. What he was a cult of personality. He was an enigmatic, he was bigger than life. He was a rock star. Here's something that... Go ahead.
Somebody who's actually from Germany, Darmstadt, Germany, who's...
Das ist wahr?
I believe it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess.
Wo kommst du hier?
I can only say Eins beer. Yeah, I only know Eins beer, one beer. That's all I can say.
You can't even say more beer or how much is the beer? That's funny. So anyway, because I want to make a.
I just add them on. But for someone that is from Germany, whose great grandfather was in World War I, serving in Germany. Her perspective is very interesting to me, when she's discussed things in the family on that aspect. And she's also said the same thing that Troy said is that it wasn't so much a blame on, just one person or the people. It's just with that drive of cult of personality, as you're also saying, is that it kind of pulls things together as, it's not that it was a good idea. It was that it was the idea.
It was the idea.
Yeah, it was the idea.
And after they got their asses kicked in World War I, and Weimar Germany was basically, it was completely reeling from all of that and paying back massive debts to the rest of the world, to the detriment of their economic system that had already been ravaged by the fact that they got their asses kicked in the war. This was a uniting voice, and he found somebody he could blame it on. Yes. You know what I mean? And so I want to leave it at that. I do want to say one last thing about this that you guys might find interesting as a historical tidbit, and that is that before the appeasement, Hitler was very popular in Europe. He was popular in Britain. He was popular in France, to the point where his book was interpreted in English and in French. But here's something that's really interesting. The publisher, Random House, found his admonishment of the Jews and his blame for the Jews to be offensive, and so they actually changed that. They left it out. They took a lot of that stuff out of his book and then republished it for Britain and France, and the Brits and the French found it to be enlightening. Did you know this?
Imagine taking out just that context, changed the book.
And so this to me is really interesting. Yeah, isn't that interesting? And if you want to see... And I'm going to leave you with some homework if you're interested. The guy who wrote that, the reason I know, book report. The reason I know this, the guy who wrote that was a man who reviewed the book in English and in German, and his name was George Orwell. Yep. George Orwell revealed this. Yes.
I did know that was a piece of trivia.
Brett Hooper saying hi. Hey, how you doing, man? Say hi to Jax for me. It's time for me to wrap it up. I got to go eat. It was really good hanging out with you all tonight. David, again, I want to thank you for all of your input tonight. It's really, really interesting to me. And again, if more people could learn to talk to each other the way that we're the way that we're talking to each other, then power would shit their pants because they would know that their time is up because we're talking to each other and not at each other. So we've had a bunch of interesting conversations tonight here in the chat, as well as the interesting conversations that I've had with you guys. And as I always say, if we got anything wrong, if I've mischaracterized something, if I got some facts or some information incorrect, please let me know. I'll be happy to check it out. And if you're right, I will correct it. I would much rather learn something from being wrong than remain ignorant by standing on some bullshit. So you guys hang out with me for just 1 minute. I'm going to wrap up the broadcast. Thanks again to everybody in the chat tonight. It was really, really great to have you all here. Good night.